The best-selling Gossip Girl series is available in paperback and on CD wherever books and audiobooks are sold, and as a download from your favorite online digital media store.
Time Warner Audiobooks presents Gossip Girl, written by Cecily von Ziegesar and read by Christina Ricci, with Gossip read by Maria DeLuca. Hey people, ever wondered what the lives of the chosen ones are really like? Well, I'm going to tell you, because I'm one of them. I'm not talking about beautiful models or actors or musical prodigies or mathematical geniuses. I'm talking about the people who are born to it. Those of us who have everything anyone could possibly wish for and who take it all completely for granted. Welcome to New York City's Upper East Side, where my friends and I live and go to school and play and sleep, sometimes with each other. We all live in huge apartments with our own bedrooms and bathrooms and phone lines. We have unlimited access to money and booze and whatever else we want. And our parents are rarely home, so we have tons of privacy. We're smart, we've inherited classic good looks. We wear fantastic clothes, and we know how to party. Our shit still stinks, but you can't smell it because the bathroom is sprayed hourly by the maid with a refreshing scent made exclusively for us by French perfumeries. It's a luxe life, but someone's gotta live it. Our apartments are all within walking distance of the Metropolitan Museum of Art on Fifth Avenue and the single-sex private schools like Constance Billard, which most of us go to. Even with a hangover, Fifth Avenue always looks so beautiful in the morning with the sunlight glimmering on the heads of the sexy St. Jude schoolboys. But something is rotten on Museum Mile. The girl who leaves for boarding school gets kicked out and comes back. Yes, Serena is back from boarding school. Her hair is longer, paler. Her blue eyes have that deep mysteriousness of kept secrets. While we are all dying to ask her why she got kicked out of boarding school, we won't, because we'd really rather she had stayed away. But Serena is definitely here. If we aren't careful, Serena is going to win over our teachers, wear that dress we couldn't fit into, eat the last olive, have sex in our parents' beds, spill Campari on our rugs, steal our brothers' and our boyfriends' hearts, and basically ruin our lives and piss us off in a major way. I'll be watching closely. I'll be watching all of us. It's going to be a wild and wicked year. I can smell it. Love, Gossip Girl. Like most juicy stories, it started at a party. Blair Waldorf tucked her long, dark brown hair behind her ears and swigged vintage scotch from the crystal tumbler in her hand. The point is, I was trapped in my room all morning because they were busy having a gross romantic breakfast in their matching red silk bathrobes. Blair took another gulp of her drink. The only way to tolerate the thought of her mother sleeping with that man was to get drunk, very drunk. Luckily, Blair and her friends came from the kind of Manhattan families for whom drinking was as commonplace as blowing your nose. Their parents believed in the quasi-European idea that the more access kids have to alcohol, the less likely they are to abuse it. So Blair and her friends could drink whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, as long as they maintained their grades and their looks and didn't embarrass themselves or their family. The man Blair was so upset about was Cyrus Rose, her mother's new boyfriend. At that very moment, Cyrus Rose was standing on the other side of the living room, greeting the dinner guests. He looked like someone who might help you pick out shoes at Saks, bald except for a small bushy mustache, his fat stomach barely hidden in a shiny blue double-breasted suit. He had a loud laugh and was very sweet to Blair's mother, but he wasn't Blair's father. Last year, Blair's father ran off to France with another man. But tonight, Blair was going to have to tolerate Cyrus Rose, because the dinner party her mother was giving was in his honor, and all the Waldorf's family friends were there to meet him. The only ones still missing were Mr. and Mrs. Vander Woodson, whose teenage daughter Serena and son Eric were both away at school. Blair's mother was famous for her dinner parties, and this was her first since her infamous divorce. The Waldorf's penthouse had been expensively redecorated that summer, and in the center of the dining room table was an enormous silver bowl full of white orchids. Gold leaf place cards lay on every porcelain plate.
You and Blair have been going out a long time, am I right? Cyrus said, punching Blair's boyfriend Nate Archibald in the arm. You sleep with her yet? Nate turned redder than the upholstery on the French chaise next to him. Well, we've known each other practically since we were born, he stuttered, but we've only been going out for like a year. We don't want to ruin it by, rushing. What was he supposed to say? Dude, if I had my way, we'd be doing it right now? Nate was one of those boys you look at, and while you're looking at them, you know they're thinking, that girl can take her eyes off me because I'm so hot. Although he didn't act at all conceited about it. He couldn't help looking hot. He was just born that way. Poor guy. That night, Nate was wearing the moss green cashmere V-neck sweater Blair had given him last Easter, when her father had taken them skiing in Sun Valley. Secretly, Blair had sewn a tiny gold heart pendant onto the inside of one of the sweater sleeves. Blair liked to think of herself as a hopeless romantic, in the style of old movie actresses like Audrey Hepburn. She was always coming up with plot devices for the movie she was starring in at the moment. The movie that was her life. I love you, Blair had told Nate breathily when she gave him the sweater. Me too, Nate had said back, although he wasn't exactly sure if it was true or not. When he put the sweater on, it looked so good on him that Blair wanted to scream and rip all her clothes off. But Blair had wanted to wait to have sex until her 17th birthday next month. But now she was through with waiting. Nate was looking better than ever. The moss green sweater had turned his eyes a dark, sparkling green, and his wavy brown hair was streaked with golden blonde from his summer on the ocean. And just like that, Blair knew she was ready. She took another sip of her scotch. Oh yes, she was definitely ready. The room was abuzz with snatches of gossip about Blair's mother and Cyrus Rose. From what Blair could hear, her mother's friends felt exactly the same way she did, although they didn't exactly use words like annoying, fat, or loser. I smell Old Spice, Mrs. Coates whispered to Mrs. Archibald. Do you think he's actually wearing Old Spice? I'm not sure, Mrs. Archibald whispered back, but I think he might be. All these people were terrible gossips. Across the room, Cyrus grabbed Eleanor and kissed her on the lips in full view of everyone. Blair shrank away from the revolting sight and headed towards Nate. I have to talk to you, Blair said. She held out her glass. Fill me up first. Nate took her glass, and Blair led him over to the marble-topped wet bar by the French doors that opened onto the dining room. Nate poured them each a tumbler full of scotch, and then followed Blair across the living room once more. Hey, where are you two going? Chuck Bass asked, leering at them suggestively. Blair rolled her eyes at Chuck and kept walking, drinking as she went. Nate followed her, ignoring Chuck completely. Chuck Bass, the oldest son of Misty and Bartholomew Bass, was handsome, aftershave commercial handsome. Chuck was also the horniest boy in Blair and Nate's group of friends. Once at a party in 9th grade, Chuck had hidden in a guest bedroom closet for 2 hours, waiting to crawl into bed with Katie Farkas, who was so drunk she kept throwing up in her sleep. In other circles, Chuck might have been banished as a slime ball of the highest order, but these families had been friends for generations. They had gotten used to his gold monogrammed pinky ring, and even his trademark navy blue monogrammed cashmere scarf. Don't forget to use protection, Chuck called as Blair and Nate turned down the long, red-carpeted hallway to Blair's bedroom. At that moment, Nate's hopes perked up. Blair was acting sort of sultry and sexy, and could it be? Something was about to happen? Blair squeezed Nate's hand and pulled him into the room. They stumbled over each other, falling toward the bed, and spilling their drinks on the mohair rug. Blair giggled. The scotch she'd pounded had gone right to her head. I'm about to have sex with Nate, she thought giddily. And then they'd both graduate in June and go to Yale in the fall and have a huge wedding 4 years later and find a beautiful apartment on Park Avenue and have sex in every room on a rotating basis. Suddenly, Blair's mother's voice rang out loud and clear down the hallway. Serena Vander Woodson? What a lovely surprise. Nate dropped Blair's hand and straightened up like a soldier called to attention. Blair sat down hard in the end of her bed and grasped the bedspread in tight, white-knuckled fists. She looked up at Nate. But Nate was already turning to go, striding back down the hall to see if it could possibly be true. Had Serena Vander Woodson really come back? The movie of Blair's life had taken a sudden, tragic turn. In the foyer, Serena pushed a stray blonde hair behind her ear and smiled. When Serena smiled, she used her eyes, those dark, almost navy blue eyes. It was the type of smile you might try to imitate, the "you can't stop looking at me, can you" smile supermodels spend years perfecting. Well, Serena smiled that way without even trying. "Serena has decided that boarding school is not for her," Serena's mother announced. She was the middle-aged version of utter coolness. The whole Vanderwoodson family was like that. They were all tall, blonde, thin, and super poised, and they never did anything, play tennis, hail a cab, go to the toilet, without maintaining their cool. Serena especially. She was the girl every boy wants and every girl wants to be. "Serena will be back at Constance tomorrow," Mr. Vanderwoodson said. "Blair will be thrilled to see you," Blair's mother trilled. "Look how skinny you are," Serena said, hugging her. "And the house looks fantastic. Wow, you've got some awesome art." Mrs. Waldorf smiled, obviously pleased, and wrapped her arm around Serena's long, slender waist. "Darling, I'd like you to meet my special friend, Cyrus Rose." "Stunning," Cyrus Rose boomed. He kissed Serena on both cheeks and hugged her a little too tightly. Serena giggled, but she didn't flinch. She'd spent a lot of time in Europe in the past 2 years, and she was used to being hugged by harmless, horny European gropers who found her completely irresistible. "Serena and Blair are best friends," Eleanor Waldorf explained to Cyrus. "But Serena went away to Hanover Academy and spent this summer traveling. It was so hard for poor Blair with you gone this past year, Serena," Eleanor said, growing misty-eyed. "Especially with the divorce. But you're back now. Blair will be so pleased." "Where is she?" Serena asked eagerly. She stood on tiptoe and craned her head to look for Blair, but soon found herself surrounded by parents. The Archbalds, the Coates, the Basses, and Mr. Farkas, who each took turns kissing her and welcoming her back. Serena hugged them happily. These people were home to her, and she could hardly wait for life to return to the way it used to be. She and Blair would walk to school together, have cocktails at the Tribeca Star Hotel, sit on Blair's four-poster bed and watch Audrey Hepburn movies, wearing vintage lingerie and drinking gin and lime juice. They would go back to being their regular old fabulous selves, just like always. Serena couldn't wait. Serena's dark blue eyes scanned the room, looking for the two people she wanted to see most, Blair and Nate. Finally, Serena found them. Nate was standing by the doorway to the hall, and Blair was standing just behind him, her head bowed, fiddling with the buttons on her black cardigan. "Come here," Serena mouthed at him, waving her hand. Her heart sped up as Nate began walking towards her. He looked better than she remembered, much better. Nate's heart was beating even faster than hers. "Hey, you," Serena breathed when Nate hugged her. He smelled just like he always smelled, like the cleanest, most delicious boy alive. Calm down, Nate told himself. But he couldn't calm down. He felt like picking her up and twirling her around. "I love you," he wanted to shout, but he didn't. He couldn't. Nate was the only son of a Navy captain and a French society hostess. His father was a master sailor and extremely handsome, but a little lacking in the hugs department. His mother was the complete opposite, always fawning over Nate and prone to emotional fits. Poor Nate was always on the verge of saying how he really felt, but he didn't want to make a scene or say something he might regret later. "So, what have you been up to?" Nate asked Serena, trying to breathe normally. "We missed you." "If only you knew, Nate. I've been so bad." Nate clenched his fists involuntarily. Man, oh man, had he missed her. Ignored as usual, Chuck slunk away from Serena and Nate and crossed the room to Blair, who was standing by Katie Farkas and Isabel Coates. $1,000 says she got kicked out, Chuck told them. "And doesn't she look fucked?" "I think she's been thoroughly fucked." "I think she looked kind of spaced out," Katie said. "Maybe she's on heroin." "Or some prescription drug," Isabel said. "You know, like Valium or Prozac. Maybe she's gone totally nuts." When is dinner going to be ready? Blair wondered, tuning out her friend's ridiculous speculations. She had forgotten how pretty Serena's hair was, how perfect her skin was, what Nate's eyes looked like when he looked at her. He never looked at Blair that way. "Hey, Blair." Serena must have told you she was coming back, Chuck said. Come on, tell us, what's the deal? Blair stared back at him blankly, her small, fox-like face turning red. The truth was, she hadn't really spoken to Serena in over a year. At first, when Serena had gone to boarding school after sophomore year, Blair had really missed her. But it soon became apparent how much easier it was to shine without Serena around. Suddenly, Blair was the prettiest, the smartest, the hippest, most happening girl in the room. She became the one everyone looked to. So Blair stopped missing Serena so much. She'd felt a little guilty for not staying in touch, but even that had worn off when she'd received Serena's flip and impersonal emails. Hitchhiked to Vermont to go snowboarding and spent the night dancing with the hottest guys. Crazy night last night. Damn, my head hurts. The last news Blair had received was a postcard this past summer. Turned 17 on Bastille Day. France rocks. Miss you. Love, Serena, was all it said. Blair had tucked the postcard into her old Fendi shoebox with all the other mementos from their friendship. A friendship she would cherish forever, but which she'd thought of as over until now. Serena was back, and everything would go back to the way it was before she left. As always, it would be Serena and Blair, Blair and Serena, with Blair playing the smaller, fatter, mousier, less witty best friend of the blonde Uber girl, Serena van der Woodsen. Or not if Blair could help it. Careful, Blair, Chuck warned, nodding at Serena and Nate. Looks like Serena's already found her next victim. Serena was holding Nate's hand loosely in hers, swinging it back and forth. Remember Buck Naked? She asked him, laughing softly. Nate chuckled, still embarrassed, even after all these years. Buck Naked was Nate's alter ego, invented at a party in 8th grade, when most of them had gotten drunk for the first time. After drinking 6 beers, Nate had taken his shirt off, and Serena and Blair had drawn a goofy, buck-toothed face on his torso in black marker. It took weeks for Buck to wash off in the shower. And what about the Red Sea? Serena said. She studied Nate's face. Neither of them was smiling now. The Red Sea, Nate repeated, drowning in the deep blue lakes of her eyes. Of course he remembered. How could he forget? One hot August weekend, the summer after 10th grade, Nate had been in the city while the rest of the Archibald family was still in Maine. Serena was up in her country house in Connecticut, so bored she'd painted each of her fingernails and toenails a different color. Blair was at the Waldorf Castle in Glen Eagles, Scotland, at her aunt's wedding. When Nate had called, Serena hopped right on the New Haven line into Grand Central Station. She stepped off the train wearing a light blue silk slip dress and pink rubber flip-flops. She wasn't carrying a bag, not even a wallet or keys. To Nate, she looked like an angel. Life didn't get any better than the moment when Serena flip-flopped down the platform, threw her arms around his neck, and kissed him on the lips. First, they had had martinis at the little bar upstairs by the Vanderbilt Avenue entrance to Grand Central. Then they got a cab straight up Park Avenue to Nate's 82nd Street townhouse. Serena and Nate had the place to themselves. Oddly enough, it was the first time they had ever been alone together and noticed. They sat out in the garden drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. Nate was wearing a long-sleeve polo shirt, and the weather was extremely hot, so he took it off. Serena was hot too, so she climbed into the fountain. She sat on the marble Venus de Milo statue's knee, splashing herself with water until her dress was soaked through. Nate staggered over to the fountain and got in with her, and soon they were tearing the rest of each other's clothes off. Nate led Serena inside and up to his parents' bedroom. The rest is history. They both had sex for the first time. It was awkward and painful and exciting and fun. It was exactly the way you'd want your first time to be, and they had no regrets. Afterwards, they turned on the television, which was tuned to the History Channel, a documentary about Moses parting the Red Sea. Serena thought that was hilarious. "You parted my Red Sea," she howled, wrestling Nate against the pillows. And he parted her Red Sea once again before the sky grew dark and the stars twinkled in the skylight. A week later, Serena went away to boarding school at Hanover Academy, while Nate and Blair stayed behind in New York. This was the first time she'd been back, the first time she and Nate had seen each other since the parting of the Red Sea. "Blair doesn't know, does she?" Serena asked Nate quietly. Blair who? Nate thought, with a momentary case of amnesia. "No, if you haven't told her, she doesn't know." But Chuck Bass knew, which was almost worse. Nate had blurted the information out at a party only 2 nights ago in a drunken fit of complete stupidity. Serena didn't seem to notice Nate's uncomfortable silence. Shit, I missed you like crazy, Nate. I wish you could have seen the stuff I pulled. I was so bad. What do you mean? Nate asked, with a mixture of dread and anticipation. And I've been such a horrible friend, too, Serena went on. I've barely even talked to Blair since I left. I can already tell she's mad. She hasn't even said hello. She's not mad, Nate insisted. Serena shrugged. Well, anyway, I'm so psyched to be back here with you guys. We'll do all the things we used to do, and you and Blair will stay together forever, and I'll be the maid of honor at your wedding. Nate frowned. Don't make that face, Nate, Serena said, laughing. That doesn't sound so bad, does it? No, I guess it sounds okay, he said, although he clearly didn't believe it. At dinner, Serena pulled up a chair in the space next to Blair. Blair, I'm sorry I've been such a complete asshole. Your parents splitting up must have totally sucked. Blair shrugged and grabbed a fresh sourdough roll from a basket on the table. If her mouth was full, she couldn't talk, and she really didn't feel like talking. I wish I'd been here, Serena said. But I had a crazy year. I have the most insane stories to tell you. Blair nodded and chewed her roll slowly, like a cow chewing its cud. Serena waited for Blair to ask her what kind of stories, but Blair didn't say anything. She just kept on chewing. Serena had wanted to tell Blair about Charles, the only Rastafarian at Hanover Academy, who'd asked her to elope with him to Jamaica. About Nicholas, the French college guy who never wore underwear and who chased her train in a tiny Fiat all the way from Paris to Milan. She wanted to tell Blair how much it sucked to find out that Hanover Academy wouldn't take her back senior year simply because she'd blown off the first few weeks of school. She wanted to tell Blair how scared she was to go back to Constance tomorrow because she hadn't exactly been studying very hard in the last year and she felt so completely out of touch. Wine, miss? Esther offered, standing at Serena's left with the bottle. Yes, thank you, Serena said. She watched the Côte d'Aron spill into her glass and thought of the Red Sea once more. Maybe Blair does know. Was that why she was acting so weird? So you and Nate are still totally together, Serena said, taking a risk. I bet you guys wind up married. Blair gulped her wine, her little ruby ring rattling against the glass. Hello, Blair. Are you okay? Yeah, Blair slurred. I'm fine. Blair heaped her plate high with food and attacked it as if she hadn't eaten in weeks. Whoa, Serena said. You must be hungry. I'm starving. All through dinner, Serena kept the table's attention with stories of her travels in Europe. When Blair had finished her second plate of duck, she ate a huge bowl full of chocolate-laced tapioca pudding. Finally, her stomach rebelled and she shot up suddenly, running down the hall to her bathroom. Blair? Serena called after her. She hurried away to see what was the matter. Nate watched the two girls flee the table with a mounting sense of unease. He was pretty sure the only thing girls talked about in the bathroom was sex. And mostly he'd be right. Blair kneeled over the toilet and stuck her middle finger as far down her throat as it would go. She'd done this before, many times. The door to her bathroom was only half closed, and Serena could hear her friend retching inside. Blair, it's me, Serena said quietly. Are you okay? I'll be out in a minute, Blair snapped, wiping her mouth. She stood up and flushed the toilet. Serena pushed the door open and Blair turned and glared at her. I'm fine, Blair said. Really? Oh, don't be such a bitch, Blair. What's the deal? It's me, remember? We know everything about each other. Blair reached for her toothbrush and toothpaste. We used to, she said, and began brushing furiously. When was the last time we talked, anyway? Like the summer before last? Serena looked down at her scuffed brown boots. I know. I'm sorry. I suck, she said. Well, you missed a lot, she said. I mean, last year was really different. She'd been about to say hard. Nate and I have become really close, you know. We tell each other everything. Well, don't worry about me and Nate, Serena said. We're just friends, and besides, I'm tired of boys. I'll see you back in there, she said, and abruptly left the bathroom. Shit, Serena thought. but she stayed where she was. Things would be better tomorrow at school. She and Blair would have one of their famous heart-to-hearts in the lunchroom over lemon yogurts and romaine lettuce. It wasn't like they could just stop being friends. "Welcome back, girls," Mrs. McLean said, standing behind the podium at the front of the school auditorium. "I hope you all had a terrific long weekend. I spent the weekend in Vermont, and it was absolutely heavenly." All 700 students at the Constance Billard School for Girls, kindergarten through 12th grade, and its 50 faculty and staff members tittered discreetly. Everyone knew Mrs. McLean had a girlfriend up in Vermont. Constance was supposed to be free of cliques and prejudice of any sort, but Mrs. M was blissfully ignorant of what really went on in the school. She certainly couldn't hear the whispering going on in the very back of the auditorium where the seniors sat. "I thought you said Serena was coming back today," Rain Hofstetter whispered to Isabel Coates. School had started 10 minutes ago, and Serena still hadn't shown up. Blair couldn't help feeling annoyed at Serena for creating even more mystery around her return than there already was. "She's probably too drugged up to come to school today," Isabel whispered back. "I heard she's selling these pills with the letter S stamped on them. She's completely addicted to them," Katie told Rain. Mrs. Weeds, the frizzy-haired hippie music teacher, began banging out the first few chords of a familiar hymn on the piano. Then all 700 girls stood up and began to sing. Their voices floated down 93rd Street, where Serena Vanderwoodson was just turning the corner, cursing herself for being late. She hadn't woken up this early since her 11th grade final exams at Hanover last June, and she'd forgotten how badly it sucked. Constance 9th grader Jenny Humphrey silently mouthed the words, sharing with her neighbor the hymnal which Jenny herself had been commissioned to pen in her exceptional calligraphy. Jenny felt sick with embarrassment every time they used the hymnals, which was why she couldn't sing out loud. She preferred to be invisible, which, as a curly-haired, tiny little freshman, wasn't hard to be. Actually, it would have been easier if her boobs weren't so incredibly huge. At 14, she was a 34D. Jenny was standing next to the big auditorium windows overlooking 93rd Street when a movement out on the street caught her eye. Blonde hair flying, Burberry plaid coat, scuffed brown suede boots, new maroon uniform. Odd choice, but she made it work. It looked like... No. Was it? Yes, it was. A moment later, Serena Vanderwoodson pushed open the heavy wooden door of the auditorium and stood in front of it, looking for her class. She was out of breath and her hair was windblown. Her cheeks were rosy and her eyes were bright from running the 12 blocks up Fifth Avenue to school. She looked even more perfect than Jenny had remembered. "Oh my God," Rain Hofstetter whispered to Katie in the back of the room. "Did she, pick up her clothes at a homeless shelter?" "She didn't even brush her hair," Isabel giggled. "I wonder where she slept last night." Mrs. Weeds ended the hymn with a crashing chord. And now, a moment of silence for those less fortunate than we are, especially for the Native Americans that were slaughtered in the founding of this country, of whom we ask no hard feelings for celebrating Columbus Day yesterday. The room fell silent. Well, almost. "Look, see how Serena's resting her hands on her stomach? She's probably pregnant," Isabel Coates whispered to Rain. "My father gives money to Phoenix House," Katie said. "I'm going to find out if Serena's been there. I bet that's why she came back halfway through term. She's been in rehab." Blair caught snippets of her friend's chatter, and it made her smile. Mrs. M turned to nod at Serena. "Girls, I'd like you all to welcome back our old friend Serena Vanderwoodson. Serena will be rejoining the senior class today." Serena walked lightly down the center aisle of the auditorium and sat down in an empty chair next to a chronic nose-picking second grader named Lisa Sykes. Jenny could hardly contain herself. Hands down, Serena Vanderwoodson was absolutely the coolest girl in the entire world. And how cool to come in late, in the middle of the term, looking like that. But never mind how Serena looked. What Jenny and every other person in the room wanted to know was, why is she back? "Hello?" Daniel Humphrey answered his cell phone on the third ring. He was standing outside Riverside Prep, smoking a cigarette. Dan squinted his dark brown eyes. He spent most of his free time in his room, reading morbid, existentialist poetry about the bitter fate of being human. He was pale, his hair was shaggy, and he was rock star thin. "Guess who's back?" Dan heard his little sister squeal excitedly into the phone. Like Dan, Jenny was a bit of a loner, and when she needed someone to talk to, she always called him. "Serena van der Woodson. Serena is back at Constance. Can you believe it?" Dan took a long drag on his Camel. His hands were shaking so much he almost missed his mouth. "Dan, did you hear what I said? Serena's back." "Yeah, I heard you," he said, feigning disinterest. "So what?" "Oh, right, like you didn't just have a mini heart attack," she said. "Forget it. I'll talk to you later." Dan snatched a pack of cigarettes out of his back pocket and lit another one with the burning stub of the one he was already smoking. His thumbnail got singed, but he didn't even feel it. Serena van der Woodson. They had first met at a party. No, that wasn't exactly true. Dan had seen her at a party. His party. The only one he'd ever had at his family's apartment on 99th and West End Avenue. It was April of 8th grade. The party was Jenny's idea, and their father, Rufus Humphrey, the infamous retired editor of lesser-known beat poets and a party animal himself, was happy to oblige. Their mother had already moved to Prague a few years before to focus on her art. Dan invited his entire class. More than 100 kids showed up, but Rufus kept the beer flowing out of a keg in the bathtub. It was the best party Dan had ever been to, not because of the booze, but because Serena van der Woodson was there. Never mind that she had gotten wasted and wound up playing a stupid drinking game and kissing some guy's stomach with pictures scrawled all over it in magic marker. Dan couldn't keep his eyes off her. Afterwards, Jenny told him that Serena went to her school, Constance, and from then on, Jenny was his little emissary, reporting everything she'd seen Serena do, say, wear, etc., and informing Dan about any upcoming events where he might catch a glimpse of her again. Those events were rare. Dan didn't inhabit the same world as Serena and Blair and Nate and Chuck. He wasn't anybody. He was just a regular kid. For 2 years, Dan followed Serena yearningly from a distance. When she went away to boarding school, he tried to forget about her. And now she was back. "Fucking hell, we've only got 5 minutes until the bell rings," Dan heard someone say in an obnoxious voice. Dan turned around, and sure enough, it was Chuck Bass, or Scarf Boy, as Dan liked to call him, since Chuck was always wearing that ridiculous monogrammed cashmere scarf. "Dude," Chuck said to his friends, who never spoke to Dan or even acknowledged his presence. "Guess who I saw last night? Serena van der Woodson." Dan's ears perked up. "Blair Waldorf's mom had this little party, and Serena was there with her parents," Chuck continued. "She was all over me. She's like the sluttiest girl I've ever met. She's been fucking Nate Archibald since 10th grade, and she's definitely gotten an education at boarding school, if you know what I mean. I heard she's got diseases, too. Someone saw her going into a clinic in the East Village." Chuck's friends shook their heads, grunting in amazement. Dan had never heard such crap. Serena was no slut. She was perfect, wasn't she? Wasn't she? "What I'm going for is tension," Vanessa Abrams explained to Constance's small advanced film studies class. She was presenting her idea for the film she was making. "So there's no dialogue?" Mr. Beckham said from where he was standing in the back of the classroom. He was painfully aware that no one else in the class was listening to a word Vanessa was saying. "You're going to hear the silence of the buildings and the bench and the sidewalk. Then you'll hear them speak, but not much. It's a mood piece," Vanessa explained. "Ha!" someone exclaimed from the back of the room. It was Blair, laughing out loud as she read the note Rain Hofstetter had just passed her. "For a good time, call Serena V.D. Woodson. Get it? V.D. Vanessa glared at Blair. Film was Vanessa's favorite class. She took it very seriously, while most of the other girls, like Blair, were only taking film as a break from advanced placement hell. They were on the straight and narrow path to Yale or Harvard or Brown, where their families had all gone for generations. Vanessa wasn't like them. Her parents hadn't even gone to college. They were artists in Vermont, and Vanessa wanted only one thing in life: to go to NYU and major in film. Vanessa was an anomaly at Constance, the only girl in the school who had a nearly shaved head, wore black turtlenecks every day, and read Tolstoy's War and Peace over and over like it was the Bible. She had no friends at all at Constance and lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn with her 22-year-old sister Ruby, who played in a band. Vanessa hated Constance, but there were only 8 months left until graduation. 8 more months of bitchy Blair Waldorf and, even worse, Serena van der Woodsen, who was back in all her splendor. So I'm going to be writing, directing, and filming this, and I've already cast my friend Daniel Humphrey from Riverside Prep as Prince Andre, Vanessa explained. Her cheeks heated up when she uttered Dan's name. But I still need a Natasha for the scene. I'm casting her tomorrow after school in Madison Square Park at dusk. Vanessa, why don't you put up a sign-up sheet in the hall for your casting tomorrow, Mr. Beckham asked. Vanessa ripped a blank sheet of paper out of her notebook and wrote the necessary details at the top of it. Her perfect Natasha wouldn't be too obviously pretty, but she'd have the kind of face that made you want to look at it. She would be full of movement and laughter, exactly the opposite of Dan's quiet energy, which burned deep inside him and made his hands shake sometimes. Vanessa hugged herself. Just thinking about Dan made her feel like she had to pee. Under that shaved head and that impossible black turtleneck, she was just a girl. Blair, Katie, and Isabel were sitting in the Constance cafeteria discussing the upcoming Kiss on the Lips benefit to raise money for the Central Park Peregrine Falcon Foundation. Blair was chair of the organizing committee, of course. What about Serena? Did you tell her about the party? Is she going to help? Isabel asked. Blair stared blankly back at her. I bet Serena's too busy, dealing with everything, Katie said, smirking. Across the cafeteria, Serena herself was just joining the lunch line. She noticed Blair right away and smiled, waving cheerfully as if to say, I'll be there in a minute. Blair watched as Serena got her salad, dreading the moment when Serena would sit down next to her in all her glory and start trying to be friends again. Ugh. Hey guys, Serena said, sitting down next to Blair, smiling radiantly. Just like old times, huh? Hello, Serena, Katie and Isabel said in unison. Blair looked up at Serena and turned the corners of her glossy lips upwards. It was almost a smile. So my schedule totally sucks, Serena said. I don't have a single class with you guys. That's because you're not taking any APs, Katie observed. You're lucky, Isabel sighed. I have so much work to do, I don't even have time to sleep. Well, at least I'll have more time to party, Serena said. She nudged Blair's elbow. What's going on this month anyway? I feel so completely out of it. Blair knew she should tell Serena all about the Kiss on the Lips party and how Serena could help with the preparations and how fun it was all going to be. But somehow she couldn't bring herself to do it. There really isn't much going on until Christmas, Blair lied, shooting a warning glance at Katie and Isabel. Really? Serena said, disappointed. Well, what about tonight? I have an AP French test tomorrow. Sorry, Serena, Blair said. She stood up. Serena frowned and began to chew on her thumbnail, a new habit she'd picked up at boarding school. Well, maybe I'll give Nate a call. Blair picked up her tray and resisted hurling it in Serena's face. Keep your hands off him, she wanted to scream, jumping off the table ninja style. Hi-ya! Serena looked up at Katie and Isabel hopefully, but they were getting ready to leave too. It's so good to have you back, Serena, Katie said in her fakest voice. Yeah, Isabel agreed, it really is. And then they walked away. Serena wondered what had happened to everyone. They were all acting like freaks. What did I do, she asked herself, chewing on her thumbnail again. Good question.
Hey people, thanks for checking in, although most of you had little to say about Serena or Blair. Most of you just want to know more about the boys. Okay, if you want to know so badly, then I'll tell you. St. Jude's lets its senior boys out for lunch, so right now, Nate is probably headed up to that little pizza joint on the corner of 80th and Madison. Vino's, Vinny's, whatever. Anyway, they have good slices, and one of the delivery guys sells pretty decent pot. Nate is one of his regulars. There's usually a group of kids from Lacole standing around outside the pizza place, so Nate will stop and flirt with this one girl who I'll call Claire. who acts all shy and pretends she doesn't speak English, but she's actually really bad at French and a huge slut. The L'Ecole girls all wear really tight clothes and short skirts and high heels. They're like the hoes of the Upper East Side school system. Nate likes to flirt with them, and so far, that's as far as it's gone. But if Blair leads him on any longer, he might start giving Claire more than just a bite of his pizza. This time, though, Claire surprises him by asking if he's heard about Serena. Claire claims to have heard that Serena not only got pregnant last year, but that she gave birth in France. Her baby's name is Jules, and he is alive and well and living in Marseille. As for Dan, well, he's sitting outside in the Riverside Prep courtyard again, reading poetry and eating PB&J. I know that sounds extremely sad, but don't worry about Dan. His time is coming. Stay tuned. Love, Gossip Girl.
From where she sat on her big canopy bed, Serena could see the silver-framed photograph of her family, taken in Greece when she was 12. They were all in bathing suits, and her brother Eric, who was 14 at the time, was making a big fart kiss on Serena's cheek while their parents looked on laughing. Serena had gotten her period for the first time on that trip. She'd been so embarrassed she couldn't bear to tell her parents, but what was she supposed to do, trapped on a boat? They were anchored off the island of Rhodes, and while their parents were snorkeling and Serena and Eric were supposed to be having windsurfing lessons, Eric had swum ashore, stolen a Vespa, and bought her some maxi pads. He came back with them in a little plastic bag tied on top of his head, her hero. Now Eric was a freshman at Brown, and Serena never got to see him. He had been in France with her that summer, but they'd both spent the whole time chasing or being chased by boys and girls, so they'd never really had time to talk. Serena picked up the phone and pressed the speed dial button for her brother Eric's off-campus apartment at Brown. The phone rang and rang until finally the voicemail system picked up. Serena hesitated. "Hey, it's Serena. Sorry I haven't called in a while, but you could have called me too, you big jerk. I was stuck up in Ridgefield, bored out of my mind until this weekend, and now I'm back in the city. I had my first day of school today. It was kind of strange. Actually, it sucked. Everything is, I don't know. Anyway, call me. I miss your hairy ass. Love you. Bye." "You're so full of shit, Dan," Jenny Humphrey told her brother. They were sitting at the kitchen table in their large and crumbling 4-bedroom West End Avenue apartment. Jenny was eating half a grapefruit and drinking a cup of peppermint tea. Dan was eating a chocolate donut, his second, and sipping instant coffee with Coffee Mate and 4 teaspoons of sugar. While he ate, Dan was studying Vanessa Abrams' script for the short film he was supposed to star in. He kept reading the same line over and over like a mantra. Life is fragile and absurd. "Tell me you don't care about Serena van der Woodsen being back," Jenny challenged Dan. "You should see her. She looks older, but it's not like wrinkles or anything. It's like she's Kate Moss or some model who's been everywhere and seen everything and come out on the other side." Dan just stared into his coffee cup. "Don't you even want to see her?" Jenny asked. Dan shrugged his shoulders and pointed at the pile of grapefruit carcasses on Jenny's plate. "That is so foul," he said. "You didn't answer my question." Dan looked back down in his script. Whatever. "Look, there's this party the Friday after next. It's some big fancy benefit thing to save the peregrine falcons that live in Central Park. Blair Waldorf is organizing it. And you know she and Serena are best friends, so of course Serena will be there. Anyway, all we have to do is find a way to get into that party." "Dan, please," she said pleadingly. "We have to go." "Jenny, I don't want to go to that party." "But why, Dan?" "Because we weren't invited? Because we're not going to be invited? Give it up, Jen. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. We don't live in the same world as any of those people." "What party?" their father asked, appearing in the doorway to the kitchen. He was wearing a sweat-stained white wife-beater and red checkered boxer shorts. Their father hated the Upper East Side and all its pretensions. He sent Jenny to Constance because it was a very good school, but he hated the idea that she might be influenced by her classmates, or those debutantes, as he called them. "Jenny wants to go to some fancy benefit next week." "A benefit for what?" "It's a party to raise money for those peregrine falcons that live in Central Park. They're probably going to build, birdhouse mansions for them or something, Dan said. Oh, shut up, Jenny said, furious. It's just a stupid party. Why does it have to be such a big deal? It's a big deal because you're going to get used to this silly debutante nonsense and you're going to wind up a big fake like your mother. Dan suddenly felt bad. Their mother was basically a kept woman. All she did all day was shop, eat, drink, and paint pictures of flowers. It wasn't a nice thing for their father to say. It wasn't nice at all. Lay off, Dad, Dan said. We weren't invited to the party anyway, so neither of us could go even if we wanted to. See what I mean? Mr. Humphrey said triumphantly. Why would you want to hang out with those snobs anyway? Jenny stared glassy-eyed at the dirty kitchen floor. Dan stood up. Hurry up and get dressed, Jen, he said gently. I'll walk you to your bus stop. Nate slipped into the computer lab. Every Wednesday, he and Blair had grown accustomed to emailing each other a quick love note to help them get over the hump of the boring school week. But today, Nate wasn't even thinking of Blair. He wanted to see how Serena was doing. Nate typed a message to Serena's old Constance email address. He didn't know if she would check it or not, but it was worth a try. Then he opened up his own email. Surprise, surprise, there was a note from Blair. They hadn't talked since their mother's party the night before last. Dear Nate, I miss you. Before we got interrupted the other night, I was planning for us to do something really special. I think you know what I'm talking about. I wasn't ready before, but now I am. My mom and Cyrus are going away on Friday, and I really want you to sleep over. I love you. Call me. Love, Blair. Nate read Blair's email twice and then closed the file so he wouldn't have to look at it anymore. It was a sunny October day in Central Park. Out in Sheep's Meadow, lots of kids were cutting school, just lying in the grass, smoking or playing frisbee. Nate, Jeremy, Anthony, and Charlie passed an enormous joint between them as they dribbled a soccer ball around on the grass. Hey, Nate, have you seen Serena van der Woodsen yet? Jeremy asked. I heard she's back. Yeah, I saw her Monday, he said casually. What'd she look like? Charlie asked. I heard she got into all sorts of trouble at Hanover. Me too, Anthony said. I heard she got kicked out for having sex with this whole group of guys in a room. Charlie laughed. I heard she had a kid in France and left it there. Her parents are paying to have it raised in some fancy French convent. Nate couldn't believe what he was hearing. You and her had a thing, didn't you, Nate? Charlie said. Where'd you hear that? Nate asked, frowning. I don't know, man, around. What's the problem? She's hot. Yeah, well, I've had hotter, Nate said, and immediately regretted it. What was he talking about? Yeah, Blair's pretty hot too, I guess, Charlie said. I bet she gets pretty crazy in bed, Jeremy agreed. Dude's tired just thinking about it, Anthony said, pointing at Nate and cackling. Nate laughed and shook his head, trying to shake their words out of his ears. He was too baked to deal with any of this. He tuned his friends out and tried to clear his mind completely. But he couldn't get the images of Serena and Blair out of his mind's eye, floating naked above his head. You know you love me, they were saying. Nate smiled and closed his eyes.
Hey people, I know it hasn't been long, but I can't resist writing more about Nate. He is so stunningly beautiful after all. Actually, my new favorite topic is the waspoid, the elite version of wastoid or stoner boy. Unlike the average stoner wastoid, the waspoid isn't into metal or online dungeon games. He gets cute haircuts and smells nice. He wears the cashmere sweaters his girlfriend buys for him. He gets decent grades and he's sweet to his mom. He sails and plays soccer. He knows how to tie a necktie. He's sexy. But the waspoid never fully invests himself in anything or anyone. He isn't a go-getter and he never says what's on his mind. He doesn't take risks, which is what makes it so risky to fall in love with him. You might have noticed that I'm just the opposite. I never know when to shut up. And I seriously believe that opposites attract. I have to confess, I'm becoming a waspoid groupie. Apparently, I'm not the only one. Love, Gossip Girl.
Serena sat in front of Miss Gloss, Constance's college advisor. There were no diplomas on Miss Gloss's wall, no evidence of any accreditations at all, just pictures of her grandchildren. Yes, well, your schedule is perfectly acceptable. Not stellar, mind you, but adequate. I imagine you're making up for it with extracurriculars. Yes? Serena shrugged her shoulders. If you can call drinking Pernod and dancing naked on a beach in Cannes an extracurricular. Not really, she said. I mean, I'm not actually signed up for any extracurriculars at the moment. No extracurriculars? But what are you going to do to improve yourself? Serena gave Miss Gloss a polite blank look. I see. Well, we'll have to get you involved in something, won't we? Miss Gloss said. I'm afraid the colleges aren't going to even look at you without any extracurriculars. She pulled a big loose-leaf binder out of a drawer and began flipping through pages and pages of flyers printed on colored paper. Here's something that starts this week. Feng Shui Flowers, the Art of Floral Design. She looked up at Serena, who was frowning doubtfully. No, you're right. That's not going to get you into Harvard, is it? Miss Gloss said with a little laugh. Miss Gloss flipped briskly through the pages. Serena gnawed on her thumbnail. She hadn't thought about this. That colleges would actually need her to be anything more than she already was. And she definitely wanted to go to college. Her parents certainly expected her to go to one of the best schools. The more Serena thought about it, the more she realized she really didn't have anything going for her. She'd been kicked out of boarding school, her grades had fallen, and her SAT scores sucked because her mind always wandered during those stupid fill-in-the-bubble tests. Basically, she was screwed. What about drama? Your English grades are quite good. You must like drama, Miss Gloss suggested. The Inter-School Drama Club is doing a modern version of Gone with the Wind. How about it? Serena tried to imagine herself alone on stage playing Scarlett O'Hara. Sure, why not? She said. Sounds like fun. Serena's home was 994 Fifth Avenue, a ritzy, white-gloved building directly across the street from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Vanderwoodsons owned half of the top floor. Their apartment had 14 rooms, including 5 bedrooms with private bathrooms, a maid's apartment, and a ballroom-sized living room. When Serena got home, the enormous apartment was empty. Her parents were rarely home. An enormous butcher block table stood in the center of the kitchen, and on the table was a pile of mail. Mostly there were invitations for her parents to balls, fundraisers, and postcards for art openings. One of these caught Serena's eye. It had obviously been lost in the mail for a little while because the opening it announced was beginning at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, which was right now. Serena looked at the picture of the artist's work. It looked like a close-up black and white photograph of an eye, tinted with pink. Maybe it wasn't an eye. She wasn't sure what it was. It was definitely cool, though. She flew into her bedroom, whipped off her maroon uniform, and pulled on her favorite pair of black leather jeans. Within minutes, she was stepping out of a taxi in front of the white-hot gallery downtown in Chelsea. The gallery was full of 20-something hipsters in cool clothes, drinking free martinis and admiring the photographs hanging on the walls. Each picture was similar to the one on the postcard. Under each one was a label, and on every label was the name of a celebrity: Kate Hudson, Joaquin Phoenix, Jude Law, Eminem. Across the room, the photo artists themselves, the Remy brothers, identical twin sons of a French model and an English duke, were being interviewed and photographed for Artforum, Vogue, W, Harper's Bazaar, and the New York Times. Serena studied each photograph carefully. They weren't eyes, she decided. But what were they? Belly buttons? Suddenly, Serena felt an arm around her waist. Hello, ma chérie, beautiful girl. What is your name? It was one of the Remy brothers. He was 26 years old and 5'7", the same height as Serena. He had curly black hair and brilliant blue eyes. He spoke with a French and British accent. He was absolutely gorgeous, and so was his twin brother. The New York Times Society reporter recognized Serena from parties a year or so back, but he had to be sure it was her. Serena Vanderwoodson, right? He said, looking up from his notepad. Serena blushed and nodded. You must model for us, one of the Remy brothers gasped, kissing Serena's hand. You must, the other one agreed, feeding her an olive. Serena laughed. Sure, she said. Why not? One of the Remy brothers pointed to a door marked private across the gallery. We'll meet you in there, he said. Don't be nervous, we're both gay. Serena hesitated, but only for a second. She could keep up with the likes of Christina Aguilera and Joaquin Phoenix, no problem. Chin up, she headed for the door, marked private. Just then, a guy from the Public Arts League and a woman from the New York Transit Authority came over to talk to the Remy brothers about a new avant-garde public art program. They wanted to put a Remy brothers photograph on the sides of buses, in subways, and in the advertising boxes on the top of taxis all over town. Yes, of course, the Remys agreed. If you can wait a moment, we'll have a brand new one. We can give it to you exclusively. What's this one called? The Transit Authority woman asked eagerly. Serena, the Remy boys said in unison. As soon as they were finished with their Wednesday after-school activities, the Kiss on the Lips organizing committee had convened over French fries and hot chocolate in a booth at the Three Guys coffee shop. Blair, Isabel, Katie, and Tina Ford from the Seton Arms School to deal with the last-minute preparations for the party. The crisis at hand was the fact that the party was only 9 days away and no one had received an invitation yet. The invitations had been ordered a week ago, but due to a mix-up, the location of the party had to be changed, rendering the invitations useless. Maybe we can ask the Peregrine Falcon people to pitch in, Isabel suggested. They've barely done anything. Blair rolled her eyes. That's the whole point. We are raising money for them. It's a cause. Blair thumbed through the list of people they were inviting to the party. There were 316 altogether. All young people, no parents, thank God. Blair's eyes were automatically drawn to a name toward the bottom of the list. Serena van der Woodsen. The address given was her dorm room at Hanover Academy in New Hampshire. Blair put the list back down on the table without correcting Serena's address. We're going to have to spend the extra money on the printer and cut corners where we can, Blair said. I can do the invitations, a small, clear voice said from behind them, for free. The four girls turned around to see who it was. I can do them all by hand tonight and put them in the mail. The materials are the only cost, but I know where to get good quality paper cheap, Jenny Humphrey said. She did all our hymnals at school, Katie whispered to Tina. They look really good. Yeah, Isabel agreed. They're pretty cool. Jenny blushed and stared at the shiny linoleum floor of the coffee shop, waiting for Blair to make up her mind. And you'll do it all for free? Blair said suspiciously. Jenny raised her eyes. I was kind of hoping that if I did the invites, maybe I could come to the party, she said. Blair weighed the pros and cons in her mind. Pros, the invitations would be unique, and best of all free, so they wouldn't have to skimp on the flowers. Cons, there really weren't any. Blair looked the girl up and down, their cute little 9th grade helper with the huge chest. She'd be totally out of place at the party, but who cared? Sure, you can make yourself an invitation. Make one for one of your friends, too, Blair said, handing the guest list over to Jenny. Serena jumped out of a cab in front of Constance and ran up the stairs to the auditorium, where the inter-school play rehearsal had already begun. As always, she was half an hour late. The sound of a Talking Heads song being played jauntily on the piano drifted down the hallway. Serena pushed open the auditorium door to find her old friend Ralph Bottoms III singing Burning Down the South to the tune of Burning Down the House. He was dressed as Rhett Butler, holding hands with a stocky girl with curly brown hair, Scarlett O'Hara. She was singing too, belting out the words in a thick Brooklyn accent. Serena leaned against the wall to watch, with a mixture of horror and fascination. The scene at the art gallery hadn't fazed her, but this was scary. She turned to gaze out the window and saw 3 girls get out of a cab together on the corner of 93rd and Madison. She squinted, recognizing Blair, Katie, and Isabel. Serena hugged herself. For the first time in her entire life, she felt left out. Without a word to anyone in the drama club, Serena slipped out of the auditorium and into the hallway outside. The wall was littered with flyers and notices, and she stopped to read them. One of the flyers was for Vanessa Abrams' film tryout. Knowing Vanessa, the film was going to be very serious and obscure, but it was better than shouting goofy songs and doing the hokey-pokey with fat, red-faced Ralph Bottoms III. Vanessa's tryout had started an hour ago, but maybe it was still going on. Once again, Serena found herself running for a cab headed downtown. "This is how I want you to do it," Vanessa told Marjorie Jaffe, the only girl who had shown up to try out for the role of Natasha in Vanessa's film. Marjorie had curly red hair and freckles, a little pug nose, and no neck. She chewed gum incessantly, and she was completely, nightmarishly wrong for the part. Daniel was lying on his back on the park bench the way Vanessa had told him to, a wounded soldier with his limbs sprawled out pathetically. Wounded in war and in love, he was tragically pale and thin and rumpled-looking. "I'm going to read Natasha's lines. Watch carefully." "Haven't you been asleep?" Vanessa as Natasha said, peering at Dan as Prince Andre. "No, I have been looking at you for a long time. I knew by instinct that you were here. No one except you gives me such a sense of gentle restfulness, such light," Dan as Prince Andre said quietly. Vanessa knelt at his head, her face radiant with solemn delight. "Natasha, I love you too dearly, more than all the world," Dan gasped, trying to sit up and then sinking back on the bench as if in pain. He said he loved her. Vanessa was completely caught up in the moment. Then she remembered herself and stood up. "Now your turn." "Haven't you been asleep?" Marjorie said, batting her eyes flirtatiously and cracking her gum. Dan closed his eyes and said his line. He could get through this without laughing if he kept his eyes closed. Just then, someone nudged her arm and whispered, "Do you mind if I try when she's done?" Vanessa turned to find Serena van der Woodsen standing beside her, a little breathless from running across the park. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes were as dark as the twilight sky. Serena was her Natasha, if ever there was one. Daniel bolted upright, forgetting his injuries and his line. Serena and Marjorie traded places. Dan had his eyes open now. He didn't dare blink. They began to read. "I've been looking at you for a long time," Dan said, meaning every word. Serena knelt down beside him and took his hand. Dan felt faint, and he was grateful he was lying down. He had been in lots of plays, but he had never felt that thing called chemistry before with anyone. Serena was enjoying herself too. The script was beautiful and passionate, and this scruffy Dan guy was a really good actor. Vanessa frowned. Serena was great. They were great together. But Dan was swooning. It was totally nauseating. Vanessa cleared her throat noisily. "Thanks, Serena. Thanks, Dan." She pretended to scribble comments in her notebook. "I'll let you know tomorrow, okay?" "In your dreams," she wrote. "Marjorie, I'll let you know tomorrow too, okay?" "'Kay," Marjorie said. "Thanks." Dan sat up, blinking. "Thanks so much for letting me try out," Serena said sweetly, turning to go. "See you later," Dan said, sounding drugged. "Let's practice your monologue, Dan," Vanessa said sharply. "I want to shoot that first." "Yum," Serena said, eyeing the cookies laid out on a table in the Constance lunchroom. Next to the cookies were plastic cups full of orange juice or milk. This was recess, the daily 20-minute break Constance gave its girls after second period. Serena saw Vanessa wearing her usual black turtleneck and bored expression. She waved a cookie at her, and Vanessa came over. "Hi," Serena said cheerfully. "Made up your mind yet?" "Actually, yes. I haven't told Marjorie yet, but I'm giving her the part." Serena dropped the cookie she was eating on the floor, stunned. "Oh," she said. "Yeah," said Vanessa, scrambling for a decent reason. "Marjorie's really rough and innocent, and that's what I'm looking for. Dan and I thought your performance was just a bit too, polished." "Oh," Serena said again. She could hardly believe it. Even Dan had vetoed her? "Sorry," Vanessa said, feeling slightly bad. She knew she shouldn't have brought Dan into it. He didn't even know she was turning Serena down. "You're a good actress, though," she added. "Don't be discouraged." "Thanks," Serena said. What was she going to tell Miss Gloss? She still didn't have any extracurriculars, and no halfway decent college was going to want her. Vanessa walked away, looking for Marjorie so she could tell her the good news. She was going to have to change the entire film now that Marjorie was her star. It would have to be a comedy. But at least she had saved herself from making Endless Love in the Park After Dark, starring Serena van der Woodsen and Daniel Humphrey. Blech. Serena stood in the corner of the cafeteria, the remaining cookies crumbling in her hand. Gone with the Wind was a total cheese fest, and she was too polished for War and Peace. What else could she do? She chewed on her thumbnail, deep in thought. Maybe she could make a movie of her own. Blair took film. She could help. When they were younger, they'd always talked about making movies. Blair was always going to be the star, and Serena always wanted to direct. She would wear floppy linen pants and shout through a bullhorn and sit in a chair with the word director on it. This was their chance. Blair, Serena nearly shouted when she saw Blair by the milk table. She rushed over to her. I need your help. I want to make a movie, and I thought you could help me, with the cameras and stuff, since you take film. Blair glanced at Katie and Isabel, who were quietly sipping milk behind her. Sorry, I can't, she said. I've got activities every single day after school. I don't have time. Oh, come on, Blair, Serena said, grabbing Blair's hand. Remember, we always wanted to do this. You wanted to be Audrey Hepburn. Blair removed her hand and folded her arms across her chest. Don't worry, I'll do all the work, Serena added hastily. All you have to do is show me how to use the camera and the lighting and stuff. I can't, Blair insisted. Sorry. Serena pursed her lips to keep them from trembling. Her eyes seemed to be growing larger and larger, and her face was turning splotchy. Seeing Serena on the verge of tears once more touched something deep inside of Blair like an involuntary impulse. But we're going out on Friday, she told Serena. Drinks around 8 at the Tribeca Star if you want to come. Serena took a deep breath and nodded. Just like old times, she said, staving off her tears and attempting a smile. Right, Blair said. She made a note in her mental Palm Pilot to tell Nate not to come out on Friday now that Serena was coming. Blair's new plan was to knock back a few drinks with Serena at the Tribeca Star, leave early, go home, fill her room with candles, and wait for Nate to come. And then they'd have sex all night long to romantic music. She'd already burned a sexy CD to play while they did it. The bell rang and the girls went their separate ways to class. Serena couldn't believe she had just been rejected not once but twice in the last 10 minutes. As she gathered her books from her locker, she tried to come up with a new plan of action. She wasn't going to give up. Dan had dark circles under his eyes because he hadn't been able to sleep the night before. All he could think about was Serena van der Woodsen. They were starring in a movie together. They were even going to kiss. Yeah, Dan said, answering his cell phone. Hey, it's Vanessa. Hey. Listen, I have to make it quick. I just wanted you to know that I told Marjorie she has the part, Vanessa said quickly. You mean Serena, Dan said, flicking his ash and taking another puff of his cigarette. No, I mean Marjorie. Wait, what are you talking about? Marjorie with the red hair and the gum? Yes, that's right, Vanessa said patiently. But Marjorie stank. You can't use her. Yeah, well, I kind of like that she stank. I think it will make it feel edgier, you know? Yeah, definitely not, Dan sneered. Look, I really think this is a mistake. Serena totally ruled. I don't know why you wouldn't want her. Yeah, well, I'm the director, so it's my choice, and I choose Marjorie, okay? A bus roared up Madison. On the side of it was a massive photograph of a belly button. Or was it a gunshot wound? Scrawled in blue, girly writing on the side of the poster was the name Serena. Vanessa stared after the bus. Was she losing her mind? Or was Serena really and truly everywhere? I just don't think she's right for us, Vanessa said, hoping Dan would come around if she used the word us. It was their movie, not hers. Fine, Dan said coldly. So are you coming out with me and Ruby in Brooklyn on Friday? Vanessa asked, eager to change the subject. No, I don't think so, Dan said. See ya. He clicked off and tossed the phone angrily into his black courier bag. He couldn't believe it. His one chance to get to know Serena was gone because Vanessa wanted to exercise her artistic license to make the worst film ever made. It was unbelievable. A bus stopped at a light right in front of him. First, Dan noticed Serena's name. It was scrawled in blue, in messy girl's handwriting, on a giant black and white poster of what looked like a rosebud. It was beautiful. Jenny was a zombie on Thursday from missing a whole night's sleep, but she'd gotten the kiss on the lips invitations done, and now she and Dan each had an invitation of their very own. Jenny put her tray down and was about to start stuffing her face when she noticed Serena's sign-up sheet. Jenny lunged for her backpack to find a pen. Life was full of miracles. It just got better and better. More miraculous still, Serena herself was coming out of the lunch line and making a beeline for Jenny, carrying her tray. Was Serena actually going to sit with her? "Hi," Serena said, beaming at Jenny and setting her tray down. "Did I just see you sign up to help with my movie?" Jenny nodded, speechless. "Well, you're the only one so far. So what can you do?" Jenny poked at her grilled cheese. She couldn't believe she'd gotten 2 sandwiches. Serena probably thought she was a disgusting pig. "Well, I'm pretty artistic. I did the school hymnals, in calligraphy, and I just did the invitations for that big party next week that everyone's going to. Blair Waldorf asked me to do them." Actually, Jenny reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope with Serena's name printed on it in ornate calligraphy. "The guest list Blair gave me still had your boarding school address. I was going to put it in your locker or something, but now that you're here..." She handed the envelope to Serena. "Thanks," Serena said, taking the envelope. She opened it and read the invitation inside, her eyes dark, her forehead creased in a frown. "Oh, God, she thinks it's ugly," Jenny thought, panicking. Serena put the invitation in her bag and picked up her fork again, looking distracted. Jenny was taking mental notes on how to act as mysterious, poised, and cool as Serena was acting at that very moment. If only she could have heard the livid thoughts in Serena's head, railing against Blair. "She didn't want me to come to the party. She didn't even tell me there was a party." "Wow," Serena said finally. "Okay, you're hired." She held out her hand and smiled sweetly. "I'm Serena," she said. "I know," Jenny said, blushing. "I'm Jenny."
Hey people, this just in from an anonymous source. Apparently back when they were still tight, Serena and Blair shared a hot tub moment together in Chuck's suite in the Tribeca Star. Was the kiss an expression of their true feelings for each other? Or were they just messing around like 2 silly drunk girls? Either way, it definitely adds a little tension to the mix. What fun! And in case you haven't seen the poster plastered on all the buses, taxis, and subways all over town, the original photo of Serena can still be seen at the White Hot Gallery in Chelsea, amidst portraits of other notorious scenesters, myself included. That's right, the Remy brothers were just too sexy to resist. The fabulous are fabulous for a reason, people. Love, Gossip Girl.
The Star Lounge in the Tribeca Star Hotel was big and swanky. One wall was lit with dozens of black candles, and a DJ was playing mellow lounge beats on a turntable. It was only 8 o'clock, but the bar was already jammed with people. Blair was sitting in an armchair right near the bar, but the stupid cocktail waitress was ignoring her. She had worn her faded Earl jeans and a boring black sweater, because she was only meeting Serena for a quick drink before she went home to prepare for her night of wild sex with Nate. And she wasn't going to dress up for that either. Blair had decided to meet Nate at the door naked. She felt like a loser sitting there all by herself without even a drink. Where was Serena anyway? She didn't have all goddamn night. "Look at her," Blair heard a woman say to her friend. "Isn't she beautiful?" Blair turned to look. Of course it was Serena. She was wearing blue suede knee-high boots and a real poochy dress. Long-sleeved with a high neck and a crystal-beaded belt in blues, oranges, and greens. It was super fantastic. She smiled and waved at Blair from across the room, weaving her way through the crowd. Blair watched the heads turn as she passed, and her stomach churned. "Hi," Serena said, plunking herself down on a square ottoman beside Blair's chair. Immediately, the cocktail waitress appeared. "Hey, Serena, long time no see. How's your brother?" the waitress said. "Hey, Missy, Eric's good. He's too busy to call me, ever." "I think he must have like 8 different girlfriends up there," Serena laughed. "How are you doing?" "I'm great," Missy said. "Hey, listen, my sister said that's you in that picture on all the buses. Is that true?" "Yeah," Serena said. "Pretty crazy, huh?" "You were so rad," Missy squealed, then glanced at Blair, who was glaring at her. "Anyway, what can I get you girls?" "Kettle One and tonic," Blair told her, looking her straight in the eye, daring her to card them. "Extra limes." But Missy would rather lose her job than hassle Serena van der Woodsen for being underage. "And for you, sweetie?" Missy asked Serena. "Oh, I better start with a Cosmo," Serena said and laughed. "I need something pink to go with my dress." Missy hurried away to fetch the drinks, eager to tell the bartender that the girl in the Remy Brothers photo that was all over town was sitting in their bar and they were pals. "Sorry I'm late," Serena told Blair, looking around. "I thought everyone else would be here with you." Blair shrugged her shoulders and took a long drag on her dwindling cigarette. "I thought we could hang out by ourselves for a while," she said. "No one really comes out until later anyway." Missy brought them their drinks. "Two old times," Serena said, clinking her glass against Blair's. She sat back on her stool and sighed with pleasure. "Don't you just love hotels?" she said. "They're so full of secrets." "Uh-huh," said Blair disinterestedly, gulping her drink. "So what's this about your picture being all over buses and stuff?" Blair said. "I haven't seen it." Serena giggled and leaned toward Blair confidentially. "Even if you saw it, you probably wouldn't recognize me. It has my name on it, but it's not a picture of my face." Blair frowned. "I don't get it. Is it something dirty?" "Not really. Lots of people have had theirs done too. You know, celebrities." "Like who?" Blair said. "Like Madonna and Eminem and Christina Aguilera." "Oh," Blair said, sounding unimpressed. Serena's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I don't know. It's like you're willing to do anything just to shock people. Don't you have any pride?" Serena shook her head, still staring at Blair. "Like what? What have I done?" "Like getting kicked out of boarding school," Blair said vaguely. Serena snorted. "What's so bad about that? Tons of people get kicked out every year. They have so many stupid rules, it's almost impossible not to get kicked out." "I don't mean that. I mean why you got kicked out." There. She had done it. She had committed herself now. She was going to have to sit and listen to Serena tell her all about the cults she had joined and the boys she'd had sex with and the drugs she had done. "Blair, the only reason I got kicked out was because I didn't show up at the beginning of school. I stayed in France. I was supposed to fly back at the end of August, but I stayed until the 3rd week in September. I was living in this amazing chateau outside of Cannes, and it was like a constant party. I don't think I slept a whole night the entire time I was there. It was like those parties in that house in The Great Gatsby. Did you ever think about the fact that these are like the most important years of our lives? Like for getting into college and everything?" Serena looked down at the floor, her pinky nail between her teeth. "Yeah, I'm just realizing that now," she admitted. Blair shook her head. "I feel sorry for your parents." Serena's eyes were getting big and her lip was trembling, but she was determined not to let Blair make her cry. Blair was just being a bitch, that's all. Maybe she was getting her period. Serena took a huge gulp of her drink. "So you never told me what you and Nate did all summer. Did you ever go up to Maine and see that boat he built?" Blair shook her head. "I had tennis camp. It sucked." They drank their drinks in awkward silence. Serena sat up suddenly, remembering something. "Hey," she said, "you know, some girl actually signed up to help me with my movie. A 9th grader. Her name is Jenny." And she gave me an invitation to that party next week. You know, the one you've been planning? Blair pulled another cigarette out of the pack and stuck it in her mouth. So Serena knew about the party. She had an invitation. Well, she was bound to find out anyway. The calligrapher, Blair said, smiling sweetly. She's good, isn't she? Yeah, she did a great job. And it was really nice of her to notice that mine had the wrong address on it. Oops, Blair said, feigning cluelessness. Sorry about that. So tell me about the party, Serena said. What's it for again? It's for those 2 peregrine falcons that live in Central Park. They're an endangered species, and everyone's worried that they're going to die or starve or the squirrels will raid their nests or whatever. I kind of have to take off. Blair slid her bag over her arm and picked up her pack of cigarettes. Serena frowned. She had taken her time getting dressed, psyching herself up for a wild night out with her friends. She'd expected a big group, all the people they always used to hang out with. But I thought we would stay here for a while. Wait for everyone else, Serena said. Where are you going, anyway? I have a practice SAT tomorrow morning, Blair said, feeling extremely superior even though she was lying her ass off. I need to prepare for it, and I want to go to bed early. Oh, Serena said. She crossed her arms and sat back on her stool. I was hoping we'd all wind up partying in the Basses' suite upstairs. They still have it, don't they? Back in 10th grade, Serena and Blair and her friends had spent many a night in Chuck Bass's suite, drinking and dancing, watching movies and ordering room service, taking hot tubs. Together, they'd pass out on the king-sized bed and stay there until they were sober enough to make their way home. Once, during a very drunken night at the end of 10th grade, Serena and Blair were soaking in the hot tub, and Blair had kissed Serena full on the lips. Serena hadn't seemed to remember it the next morning, but Blair never forgot it. The Basses still have the suite, Blair said, standing up. But they really don't appreciate people using it. This isn't 10th grade anymore, she added coldly. Okay, Serena said. She couldn't say anything right, could she? At least not to Blair. Well, have a good weekend, Blair said with a stiff smile, as if they'd only just met. She dropped $20 on the table for their drinks, pushed her way through the crowd, and left. Blair walked over to 6th Avenue to catch a cab back uptown. It was starting to rain, and her hair was frizzing. A bus roared by with Serena's picture on the side of it. Blair turned her back on it and waved her hand in the air to flag down the next taxi. She couldn't get away fast enough. Serena was fucking everywhere. Serena reached for another cigarette and stuck it in her mouth with trembling fingers. Suddenly, a pinky-ringed hand preferred a Zippo and lit the cigarette for her. Hey, Serena, you look seriously hot, Chuck Bass said. What are you doing sitting here all by yourself? Blair ditched me, and now I'm all alone. Is anyone else coming? Who knows, he said casually. Another round, Chuck called over to Misty. I put everything on my tab. He handed Serena the 20 Blair had left on the table. You can keep that, he said. But it's Blair's, Serena said. Give it back to her then, Chuck said. Serena nodded and stuffed the bill into her red velvet handbag. Hey, let's get one more drink and take it up to my suite, okay? I'll tell the bar staff to tell anyone who comes to meet us up there. Are you sure it's okay? Chuck laughed and stood up. Of course it's okay. Come on. Even though it was raining out and he was freezing his ass off, Nate was in no hurry to get to Blair's house. It was pretty ironic, really. Here he was, a 17-year-old guy about to have sex with his girlfriend for the first time. Hers, anyway. He should have been running. She must know by now, he kept telling himself. How could she not? The whole city had to know by now that he had had sex with Serena. Thinking about it was driving Nate insane. He ducked into a liquor store on Madison Avenue and bought a half pint of Jack Daniels. He'd already smoked a little joint at home, but he needed a shot of courage before he saw Blair. He had no idea what he was in for. Nate walked the rest of the way as slowly as he could, taking surreptitious sips from the bottle. Just before turning down 72nd Street to her apartment, he bought Blair a rose. Chuck ordered another round of drinks from the bar, and Serena followed him into the elevator and up to the Bass's 9th floor suite. On the coffee table in the living room was a pile of photographs. Serena recognized Nate's face in the top one, and she shuffled through them. "Last year," Chuck said, shaking his head. "We were pretty crazy." Blair, Nate, Chuck, Isabel, Katie, everyone was in them. So Blair had lied. Everyone did still party in the Bass's suite, same as always. Chuck took off Serena's boots and began to massage her feet. It felt good. He bit her big toe and kissed her ankle. "Chuck," Serena giggled, falling back on the couch and closing her eyes. The room tilted a little. She never could hold her liquor. "Do you mind if we just sit here? We don't have to do anything, okay? Let's just hang out and watch Dirty Dancing, like girls." Chuck crawled towards Serena until he was looming over her and she was pinned beneath him. "But I'm not a girl," he said. He lowered his face to hers and began to kiss her. His mouth tasted like peanuts. "Shit!" Blair shrieked when she heard the doorman buzz from downstairs. She was still wearing her clothes, and she had just spilled red candle wax all over her rug. Blair switched off her bedroom light and ran to answer the buzzer in the kitchen. "Yes, send him up," she told the doorman. She unbuttoned her jeans and flew back to her room, wriggling out of them. Then she pulled the rest of her clothes off and tossed them into the closet. Naked, she spritzed herself with her favorite perfume, even spritzing once between her legs. Blair checked out her naked body in the mirror. Her legs were too short for the rest of her body, and her boobs were small and not as pay attention to me as she would have liked them. Her skin was still nice and tan from the summer, but her face seemed young and scared, not nearly as sexy as it was supposed to look. Blair dashed into the bathroom and ran her hairbrush through her long brown hair until it cascaded onto her shoulders in the sexiest way possible. There, instant irresistibility. The doorbell rang. Blair dropped her hairbrush and it clattered in the sink. "Hold on," she called out. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes to say a little prayer, although she wasn't exactly the praying type. "I hope it goes well." It was the best she could do. Serena let Chuck kiss her for a while because he was heavy and she couldn't get him off her. "Chuck, I really don't feel so well," she said. "Do you mind if I just lie here for a little while?" Chuck sat up and wiped his mouth. "Sure, that's cool," he said. He stood up. "I'll go get you some water." Chuck went to the wet bar and filled up a glass with ice, pouring in a bottle of Poland spring water. When he turned to take the water back to Serena, she was already asleep. "Hi," Blair said, opening the door a crack and poking her face through it. "Hi," Nate said, holding the rose. His hair was wet and his cheeks were pink. "I'm naked," Blair told him. "Really?" Nate said, barely absorbing the information. "Can I come in?" "Sure," Blair said, opening the door wide. Nate stared at her, frozen in the doorway. Blair blushed, hugging her arms around herself. "I told you I was naked." She reached her hand out to take the flower. "Should I take off my shoes?" Blair laughed and opened the door wider. "Just hurry up and take her clothes off," she said. "Come on." Nate followed her into her bedroom, not doing any of the things a boy should normally have done under the circumstances. Like check out Blair's bare ass, or worry about condoms or bad breath, or try to say the right thing. He was barely thinking at all. Blair's room was a blaze of candles. A bottle of red wine was open on the floor with 2 glasses beside it. Blair knelt down and poured each of them a glass, like a little geisha. Blair had made and remade the movie of this moment in her head so many times she felt like an actress who was finally getting her big break, playing the role of her career. "Take off your clothes, Nate," Blair whispered. Maybe after we do it, I'll tell her, Nate thought. That didn't seem completely fair, but still, he kissed her. And once he started, he couldn't stop. When Serena woke up, Chuck had changed the channel to MTV2 and was singing along loudly to Jay-Z. Serena's poochy dress had ridden up above her waist, and her lacy blue underwear was showing. "What time is it?" she said. "Time for us to take off our clothes and get into bed. He'd been waiting long enough." I feel awful, she said. I want to go home. Fine, Chuck said angrily. I'll help you get a cab. Serena pulled on her boots and stared at the cold rain falling outside the hotel room window. It's raining, she said, taking a sip of water. Chuck handed her a scarf, his trademark blue cashmere, monogrammed with the letters CB. Wrap it around your head, he said. Come on, let's go. They rode down in silence. Outside, a cab pulled up, the Remy Brothers poster in the box on the cab's roof. Chuck held the door open for her, and she slid into the back seat. Thanks, Chuck. Whatever, Chuck said. What's your problem, anyway? You've been fucking Nate Archibald since the 10th grade, and I'm sure you did just about every guy at boarding school and in France, too. What are you, like, too good to give me some? What about a condom or something, Blair murmured, gaping at Nate's hard-on. It looked like it was going to take over the world. She had managed to get all of his clothes off, and now they were lying down on her bed on top of the covers. Nate rolled onto his back. He had been so uptight about seeing Blair that he hadn't eaten dinner, and now he was feeling hungry. Maybe when he went home, he'd pick up a burrito from the Mexican place on Lexington Avenue. That's what he wanted, a chicken and black bean burrito with extra guacamole. Blair bit down hard in his pinky. Ow, Nate said, his hard-on deflating as if it had been pricked with a pin. I can't do this, he muttered under his breath. What? Blair said. What's wrong? Her heart fell. This wasn't in the script. Nate was ruining a perfect moment. Remember the summer before last when you were away in Scotland at your aunt's wedding? Nate began. Blair nodded. It was so friggin' hot that summer. I was in the city, I got bored, so I called Serena in Ridgefield and she came down. Nate noticed Blair's back stiffen when he mentioned Serena's name. We had some drinks out in the garden. It was so hot, Serena started splashing around in the fountain, and then she started splashing me, and I guess I got kind of carried away. And what? Blair demanded. What happened? We kissed. He took a deep breath and held it. And then we had sex. Blair stood up. I knew it. Who hasn't had sex with Serena, that nasty, slutty bitch? Just before midnight, the taxi pulled up at 994 Fifth Avenue. Across the street, the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art were deserted, glowing eerily white in the light. Serena stepped out of the cab and waved to Roland, the old night doorman. The door to the apartment opened, but it wasn't Roland who opened it. It was Nate. Nate, Serena squealed. After they rode the elevator up to Serena's apartment, she led the way to her room and sat down heavily on the bed, pulling off her boots. I thought you'd come out tonight. Oh, I'm so tired. She patted the bed next to her and slid over to give Nate room. Come lie down and tell me a bedtime story. Nate swallowed. Breathing in the scent of Serena's room with Serena in it made his heart hurt. He lay down next to her, their bodies touching. Nate put his arm around Serena and she kissed his cheek, snuggling in close. I was just over at Blair's, Nate said. But Serena didn't answer. She was breathing steadily. Maybe she was already asleep. Nate lay still, his mind racing. He wondered if he and Blair were officially broken up now. He wondered if he kissed Serena right now, full on the lips, and told her he loved her, how she'd respond. He wondered if he'd just gone ahead and had sex with Blair, if everything would have been all right. Nate cast his eyes around the room, taking in all the familiar objects that he'd grown up seeing and forgotten all about. On the floor by the door was Serena's bag. The contents had spilled out of it. A $20 bill, an Amex card, and a navy blue scarf with the letters CB stitched on it in gold. Serena reached up and put her arms around Nate's neck, pulling him toward her. Come on, she murmured, her eyes still closed. Sleep with me. Nate's whole body tensed. He didn't know if Serena meant just go to sleep or sleep with her, but he was definitely aroused. Any boy in his right mind would be, which is exactly what turned Nate off. There was something so careless about the way Serena had said it. Nate suddenly had no trouble imagining her doing the things he had heard she'd done. Nate pulled away from her and stood up. He snatched up Chuck's scarf and tossed it on the bed. And then, without even looking at Serena again, he left, slamming the door behind him.
Hey, people. Can you believe Nate? He was this close to getting a nice slice of Blair pie, if you know what I mean. I guess we're supposed to admire his self-control, his ability to keep the old hot dog in the bun. But I bet Blair really wouldn't have minded too much if Nate had just kept his mouth shut and got on with it, instead of getting all moral on her and telling her all about his time with Serena. I mean, who's Blair gonna lose it to now? I was wrong about boys. I always thought they'd do anything to bag a virgin. I mean, I thought Nate would like the idea that Blair has never done it. But he doesn't seem to care about that at all. All it does is make having sex with her this huge thing that he can't deal with without smoking a big fatty and downing half a bottle of JD. So disappointing. Not that he was too quick to jump Serena's bones either. And we all know she's no virgin. Maybe Nate just has high moral standards. Ooh, that makes me like him even more. Love, Gossip Girl.
Late Sunday morning, the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art were crawling with people. Inside, brunch was being served in the Egyptian wing for all the museum's board members and their families. Eleanor Waldorf, Cyrus Rose, the Vander Woodsons, the Basses, the Archibalds, and their children were there, all seated around one table. Blair was sitting between Cyrus Rose and her mother, looking grumpy. Nate had been intermittently baked, drunk, or passed out since Friday, and looked woozy and rumpled, as if he'd just woken up. Serena was wearing some new clothes she'd bought shopping with her mother the day before, and she had a new haircut, with soft layers framing her face. She looked even more beautiful than ever, but nervous and jumpy after drinking 6 cups of coffee. Only Chuck seemed at ease, happily sipping his Bloody Mary. "Anyone see the styles section of the Times today?" Cyrus asked, looking around the table. Serena's head shot up. Her picture with the Remy brothers, she'd forgotten all about it. She pursed her lips and slunk down in her chair, waiting for an inquisition from her parents and everyone else at the table. But it never came. It was part of their social code not to dwell on things that embarrassed them. Nate's mother cleared her throat. "How is the kiss on the lips party going, Blair? Are you girls all ready?" she asked, swigging her 7-7. "Yes, we're all set," Blair answered politely. "I remember all the cotillions I used to organize," Mrs. Vander Woodson said with a dreamy expression. "But the thing we always used to worry about most was would the boys show up." She smiled at Nate and Chuck. "We don't have to worry about that with you two, do we?" she said. "I'm all over it," Chuck said, scarfing down an omelet. "I'll be there," Nate said. He glanced at Blair, who was staring at him now. "Excuse me," Blair said. Then she stood up abruptly and left the table. Nate followed her. "Blair," he called, weaving his way around the other tables. "Wait up." Without turning around, Blair began walking even faster. "Come on, Blair. I'm sorry, okay? Can we please talk?" Blair reached the door to the woman's room. "Just leave me alone, okay?" she said sharply and went inside. Nate stood outside the door for a moment with his hands in his pockets, thinking. That morning, when he'd put on the green sweater Blair had given him, he'd found a little gold heart sewn into the sleeve. For the first time, he realized that she really meant it when she said she loved him. It was pretty intense, and pretty flattering, and it kind of made him want her again. Serena had to pee desperately, but she couldn't face being in the bathroom at the same time as Blair. After Blair and Nate had been gone for 5 minutes, though, Serena couldn't hold it any longer. She stood up and headed for the ladies' room. Quick, heavy footsteps smacked on the floor behind her, and she turned around. It was Cyrus Rose. "Tell Blair to hurry if she wants dessert, will you?" he told her. Serena nodded and pushed open the door to the ladies' room. Blair was washing her hands. She looked up, staring at Serena's reflection in the mirror over the sink. Cyrus says to hurry if you want dessert, Serena said abruptly, walking into a stall and banging the door shut. She pulled down her underwear and tried to pee, but she couldn't, not with Blair in the room. There was a quiet, awkward pause. Okay, Serena heard Blair say before she left the bathroom. The door swung shut and Serena relaxed and started to pee. Cyrus caught Nate in the men's room. You and Blair have a fight? Cyrus asked. Kind of, he said. Let me guess, it was about sex, right? Well, sort of, he said. He really didn't want to get into it. The only thing couples really fight about is sex and money, Cyrus observed. I'm not going to give you a lecture or anything. This is my future stepdaughter we're talking about. I'm sure as hell not going to tell you how to get into her pants. Cyrus chuckled to himself and left the bathroom. Nate turned on the tap and splashed cold water on his face. He studied himself in the mirror. He looked like shit. As soon as this damn brunch was over, he was heading into the park for a smoke in the sun and a couple of tall boys. The perfect cure-all. But first he'd have to flirt with Blair a little bit, enough to make her want him again. Nate pushed open the men's room door at exactly the same time that Serena pushed open the ladies'. Together they walked down the hallway back to the table. Nate, can you please explain why you're not talking to me? I'm not talking to you, Nate said. See, I'm talking to you right now. What's wrong? Did Blair say something to you about me? He looked down at the marble floor, avoiding Serena's beautiful sad eyes. We should get back, Nate said, speeding up. Fine, Serena answered, trailing after him slowly. She had that sour, salty taste in the back of her throat again, the taste of tears. She'd been holding them back for too many days now, and she could feel a tidal wave coming on. When Nate and Serena took their places at the table, Chuck smirked at them knowingly. How was it, his face seemed to say. Serena wanted to hit him. She ordered another cup of coffee and dumped 4 teaspoons of sugar in it and stirred, like she was trying to stir a hole through the cup. Nate ordered a Bloody Mary. Blair had already devoured her creme brulee and was working on her mother's. Hey, Blair, Nate said softly, causing Blair to drop her spoon with a clatter. He smiled and leaned across the table. That looks awesome, he said. Can I have a bite? Blair's hand fluttered nervously to her heart. Sexy Nate. Her Nate. God, she wanted him. But she wasn't going to give up that easily. She had her pride. You can have the rest, she said and stood up. Excuse me. Then she clacked away in her heels to stick her finger down her throat in the ladies' room.
Hey people, I thought Serena looked cute in her picture in the Sunday Times style section. Although her teachers probably weren't thrilled to see her double fisting martinis on a school day. To tell you the truth, I'm kind of over the whole thing. I mean, isn't it enough that we have to see that picture of her every time we use public transportation? 2 questions. First, if you knew about a party that you weren't invited to, wouldn't you go just to piss people off? I would. Second, if you'd made your mind up to go to the party, wouldn't you want to really rub people's noses in it by looking completely gorgeous and stealing everyone's boyfriends? Definitely. But who knows what Serena will decide to do? That girl is full of surprises. At least I've given us something all to think about while we're getting our pedicures, plucking our eyebrows, and squeezing our zits. See you at the party.
Each day that week, Serena had gone to school, come home, watched some TV, eaten dinner, watched some more TV, and gone to sleep. She even did some homework. She spoke to no one except her parents and her teachers and maybe a passing greeting to the girls at school. And for the first time in her entire life, she felt ugly and awkward. It was Friday, the night of the Kiss on the Lips party. And the question she couldn't answer, to go or not to go. It used to be, before fancy parties like this, Serena and her friends would spend half the night getting dressed together, swilling gin and tonics, dancing around in their underwear, trying on crazy outfits. But tonight, Serena rummaged through her closet alone. Toward the back was a black velvet flapper dress that Serena had bought with Blair at a vintage store. It reminded Serena of the good time gal she'd been when she bought the dress, her old self. The girl she'd been up until 2 weeks ago. She let her robe drop to the floor and slipped the dress on over her head. Maybe it would give her back some of her power. Serena heard her phone ring. Was it Nate calling to apologize? Blair? She raced down the hall on her bare feet, scrambling to pick it up. "Hello?" she said breathlessly. "Yo, bitch, sorry I haven't called in a while." Serena took a deep breath and sat down on her bed. It was Eric, her brother. "Hey," she said. "Saw you in the paper last Sunday. You are crazy, aren't you?" Eric laughed. "What did Mom say?" "Nothing. It's like I can do whatever I want now. Everyone thinks I'm, ruined or something," Serena said, fumbling for the right words. "That's not true," Eric said. "Hey, what's up? You sound sad." "Yeah," her lower lip started to tremble. "I sort of am." "How come? What's going on?" "I don't know. There's this party I'm supposed to go to that everyone's going to. You know how it is," she began. "That doesn't sound so bad," Eric said gently. Serena rested her head against the pillows and closed her eyes. "It's just that no one's talking to me anymore. I don't even know why, but ever since I've been back, it's been like I have mad cow disease or something." "What about Blair and Nate? Those guys must be talking to you. They're your best friends." "Not anymore," Serena said quietly. Tears were streaming freely down her face now. "Well, you know what I say," Eric said. "What?" "Fuck 'em. You don't need them. You're like the coolest chick in the Western Hemisphere," he said. "But they're my friends." "Not anymore. You just said so yourself. You can get new friends. I'm serious. You can't let assholes turn you into an asshole." It was a perfect Ericism. Serena laughed. "You're right. I'm always right. That's why I'm so hard to get a hold of. There's a huge demand for people like me," he said. "I miss you," Serena told him, chewing on her pinky nail. "I miss you too," Eric said. "Serena, we're leaving." She heard her mother call from out in the hall. "Okay, I better go," Serena said. "Love you. Bye." Eric was right. She didn't have to go to some stupid benefit just because everyone else was going. Fuck 'em. She carried the phone over to her desk and shuffled through a pile of papers until she found the constant student directory. Serena read through the names. She wasn't the only one skipping the party. She could find someone else to hang out with. "Yo," Vanessa said, picking up the phone. She was getting ready to go out with her sister and her friends, and she was wearing a black bra, black jeans, and her Doc Martens. She didn't have any clean black shirts left, and her sister Ruby was trying to convince her to wear a red one. "Hi, is this Vanessa Abrams?" "Yes, who's this?" Vanessa said, standing in front of her bedroom mirror and holding the red shirt up to her chest. "It's Serena Vanderwoodson." "Oh, what's up?" "Well, I totally understand why you wanted to cast Marjorie, for your film. But you seem to really know what you're doing, and I really need the extracurricular or Miss Gloss is going to kill me. So I thought I'd try to make my own movie." "Uh-huh," Vanessa said, trying to figure out why Serena Vanderwoodson would be calling her up on a Friday night. "So anyway, I was wondering if maybe you could help me. Show me how to use the camera and whatever." Serena sighed. "I don't know. Maybe making a film is a dumb idea. It's probably a lot harder than I think." "It's not dumb," Vanessa said, feeling kind of sorry for Serena despite herself. "I can show you some of the basic stuff." "Really?" Serena sounded thrilled. "How about tomorrow? Can you do it tomorrow?" Saturday was Vanessa's vampire day. She usually woke up after dark and then went to the diner or to the movies with her sister or Dan. "Sunday is better," she said. "Okay, Sunday," Serena said. "You probably have a lot of equipment and stuff at your house, right? Why don't I come over there so you don't have to lug it around?" "Sounds good," Vanessa said. "Okay," Serena said. She paused. She didn't seem very eager to hang up the phone. "Hey, isn't that big party in the old Barney's building tonight? Vanessa said. Aren't you going? Nah, Serena said. I wasn't invited. Serena Vanderwoodson wasn't invited? Maybe she wasn't so bad after all. Well, do you want to come out with us tonight? Vanessa offered before she could stop herself. Me and my big sister are going to a bar here in Williamsburg. Her band is playing. I'd love to, Serena said. Vanessa gave her the address and hung up the phone. Life was so strange. She picked up the red shirt, pulled it on over her head, and looked in the mirror. Dan will like it, her sister Ruby told her, standing in the doorway. Well, Dan's not coming out tonight. He used to take his little sister to some fancy ball. Vanessa stuck out her chest and smiled invitingly at her reflection. Maybe I'll get lucky, she thought. I have a friend coming to meet us, Vanessa informed her sister. Name? Said Ruby. Serena Vanderwoodson, Vanessa mumbled. The girl whose picture is all over town? Ruby said, clearly delighted. Yeah, that's her, Vanessa said. What fantastic flowers, said Becky Dormond, a junior at Constance. She kissed Blair on both cheeks. And what a hot dress. Thanks, Beck, Blair said, looking down at the green satin sheath she was wearing. She had gotten her period that morning, but she had to wear extremely flimsy underwear with her dress. It made her nervous. A waiter walked past with a tray of champagne. Blair whisked a flute off his tray and downed it in a matter of seconds. It was her third so far. I love your shoes, Blair said. Becky was wearing black, high-heeled sandals that laced all the way up to her knees. Blair? Blair heard someone say in a tremulous voice. Blair turned around to see little Jenny Humphrey standing behind her, looking like a human wonder bra in her black satin dress. Oh, hello, Blair said coolly. Thanks again for doing those invitations. They really came out great. Thanks for letting me do them, Jenny said. Her eyes darted around the huge room, which was throbbing with people and music and smoke. Jenny had never been to anything this cool in her life. God, I don't know anyone here, she said nervously. My brother Dan was supposed to come with me, but he didn't really want to, so I just let him drop me off. Actually, I do know one person. Oh, said Blair, and who is that? Serena Vanderwoodson. Blair grabbed a chunky tuna roll from a passing waitress and shoved it into her mouth. Serena's not here yet, she said, but I'm sure she'll be thrilled to see you. I guess I'll just wait for her here then, Jenny said, snagging 2 flutes of champagne from a waiter's tray. She handed one to Blair. Will you wait with me? Blair took the champagne, tilted her head back, poured it down the hatch. The sickly sweet fizziness of it didn't exactly jive with the raw fish and seaweed she'd just eaten. Blair burped queasily. I'll be right back, she told Jenny, practically running for the powder room. Another waiter walked by with more champagne, and Jenny took 2 more glasses. She'd never had champagne before. It tasted wonderful. Jenny sat down and waited, drinking both glasses of champagne and wishing her dress wasn't so tight. It started to make her feel nauseous. Well, hello, a deep voice said, hovering above her. Jenny looked up. Her eyes settled on Chuck Bass's aftershave commercial face, and she sucked in her breath. He was the best-looking boy she'd ever seen, and he was looking right at her. Aren't you going to introduce me? Chuck said, staring at Jenny's chest. To who? Jenny said, frowning. Chuck just laughed and held out his hand. Blair had sent him over there to talk to some chick, and he'd been skeptical, but not anymore. It was definitely his lucky night. I'm Chuck. Would you like to dance? Jenny hesitated and glanced at the door, still no Serena. She stood up, a little wobblier than she'd been before. Sure, let's dance, she slurred, falling against Chuck's chest. He slipped his arm around her waist and squeezed her tight. Good girl, he said, like he was talking to a dog. As she stumbled out into the dance floor with him, Jenny realized Chuck hadn't even asked her name. But he was so handsome, and the party was so amazing. This would definitely go down as one of the most memorable nights of her life. Your sister's awesome, Serena said. Vanessa shrugged. It's a pain in my ass, though. Everyone's always like, Ruby's so cool. Serena laughed. I know what you mean. Everybody loves my older brother. My parents are always so into everything he does, and now that I'm back from boarding school, it's like, oh, we have a daughter? Totally, Vanessa agreed. She couldn't believe she was having such a ridiculously normal conversation with Serena van der Woodsen. Ruby brought them their drinks. Sorry, guys, I gotta go set up. Good luck, Serena told her. Thanks, sweetie, Ruby said. She picked up her guitar case and went to find her bandmates. Vanessa couldn't believe it. Ruby never called anyone sweetie except her parakeet. Serena certainly had a way of melting people's hearts. Vanessa was even starting to like her a little herself. She picked up her drink and clinked glasses with Serena. Serena tossed back her shot and blinked a few times. A scruffy-looking guy wearing a tuxedo was walking into the bar. He stopped in the doorway and stared at Serena as if he'd seen a ghost. Hey, isn't that your friend Dan? Serena asked Vanessa. Jenny had let him blow the party off, so he'd come to the Five and Dime to apologize to Vanessa for being such a dick over the Marjorie thing. He'd tried to convince himself it didn't matter that he'd probably never see Serena van der Woodsen again in his life. After all, he told himself, life was fragile and absurd. Life was absurd, all right, because there Serena was, in Williamsburg of all places, his dream girl. Hey, Dan said when he reached their table, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? Vanessa said. I blew off that kiss on the lips party. It really wasn't my thing, Dan said. Me too, Serena said, smiling at Dan like he'd never been smiled at before. Nice tux. Dan blushed. Thanks. And that dress looks pretty also, he stuttered. He hadn't thought it was possible to sound so idiotic. What about my shirt? Vanessa said loudly. Have you ever seen me look this hot? Dan stared at Vanessa's shirt. It was a red t-shirt. Is it new? He asked, confused. Never mind, Vanessa sighed. Grab a chair, Serena said, moving over to make room for him. Ruby's band is going to play in a minute. The rumors couldn't possibly be true. Serena didn't look like a sex-crazed, drug-addicted maniac. She looked delicate and perfect and exciting. Blair, Nate called, cautiously pushing open the ladies' room door. Are you in there? I'll be right out, she said, waiting for him to leave. But Nate pushed the ladies' room door open all the way and stepped inside. I'm really fine, she said. You can go back to the party. You look nice, Nate said, ignoring her. He reached out and rubbed one of Blair's bare shoulders. Her skin felt warm and soft. Thanks, said Blair, her lower lip beginning to tremble. So do you. I'm sorry, Blair. I really am, Nate began. Blair nodded and began to cry. Nate pulled a paper towel from the dispenser and handed it to her. I think the only real reason I did it, that I did it with Serena, is because I knew she'd do it, he said, grasping for the right words. But it was you I wanted all along. Blair swallowed. He'd said it just right, exactly the way she'd written it in the script in her head. She put her arms around Nate's neck and let him hold her. So everything's okay now, he said. You still want me? Blair caught the reflection of the two of them together in the bathroom mirror and gazed up into Nate's gorgeous green eyes and nodded yes. But only if you promise to stay away from Serena, she sniffled. He nodded. I promise. And then they kissed, a sad, soft kiss. In her head, Blair could hear the swell of music signaling the end of the scene. Come on, she said, pulling away and wiping the mascara smudges from under her eyes. Let's go see who's here. Holding hands, they left the ladies' room. Katie Farkas smiled knowingly as she tottered past them on the way in. You guys, she scolded. Get a room. This band rocks, Serena shouted at Vanessa over the pounding drum and bass. Vanessa smiled, pleased that Serena liked the music. Personally, she hated it, although she'd never tell her sister Ruby that. Come on, Serena said, standing up, let's dance. Vanessa shook her head. That's okay, she said. You go. Dan, Serena said, tugging on his jacket sleeve. Come on. Dan never, ever danced. He hesitated, glancing at Vanessa, who raised her black eyebrows, challenging him. If you get up and dance right now, you will go straight to the top of my loser list, her look said. Dan stood up. Sure, why not, he said. Serena grabbed his hand and pushed her way into the gyrating throng, with Dan stumbling after her. Dan laughed and Serena smiled and closed her eyes, getting seriously down. Dan closed his eyes too, letting his body follow hers. It really didn't matter that he danced like a moron. He was with her, and that was what mattered. Alone at the table, Vanessa finished first her drink and then Dan's. Then she got up and went to sit down at the bar. Nice shirt, the bartender remarked when he saw her. He was in his early 20s, with red hair, long sideburns, and a cute, sly smile. Thanks, Vanessa said, smiling back at him. It's new. You should wear red more often, he said. He held his hand out. I'm Clark. You're Vanessa, right? Ruby's sister? Vanessa nodded. Can I tell you a secret? Clark said. He poured a few different things into a martini shaker and shook it up. Oh, fuck, Vanessa thought. Here's when he pours out his heart and tells me all about how he's been in love with Ruby forever, but she doesn't seem to notice him. What? She said. Well, I see you and Ruby come in here all the time. Here he goes, thought Vanessa. And you never come up to the bar and talk to me, but I've kind of had a crush on you since I first saw you. Nate and Blair were dancing together, her cheek against his chest, both of their eyes closed. Blair had put her brain on pause and her head was full of static. She was tired of dreaming up movies. Right now, real life suited her just fine. A few couples away, Chuck had his hands full of Jenny Humphrey. She was trying to dance as fast as she could to keep Chuck from groping her, but it was having the opposite effect. Chuck was absolutely delighted. He put his arms around Jenny's waist and pulled her off the dance floor and into the ladies' room. What are we doing? Jenny said, confused. She knew Chuck was friends with Serena and Blair, and she wanted to trust him, but Chuck still hadn't asked her what her name was. He'd barely spoken to her at all. I just want to kiss you, Chuck said. He bent his head down and enveloped her mouth in his. Jenny opened her mouth and let him thrust his tongue deep into her throat. She had kissed boys before, playing games at parties, but she'd never tongue-kissed like this. She reached up and pushed against Chuck's chest, pulling her head away from him, desperate for air. I have to go to the bathroom, she mumbled, stumbling backwards into a stall and locking the door. She could see Chuck's feet standing outside the stall. All right, he said, but I'm not finished with you yet. Jenny's mind was racing. What should she do? Anxiously, she reached inside her little black handbag for her cell phone. Chuck crouched down to look under the stall door. What was she doing in there, the little tease? He crawled forward on his hands and knees. That's it, I'm coming in. Dan had some new moves down, and he was in the middle of an experimental slide when his cell phone went off. Damn, he said, pulling it out of his pocket. Dan, he heard his sister's voice. Hey, Jen, hold on, all right? I can't hear you. He tapped Serena on the arm and pointed to his phone. Sorry, he shouted over the music. Dan? Her voice sounded very small and scared and far away. I need your help. Please come get me. Now? Dan looked up. Serena was walking toward him, a worried frown on her perfect face. Is everything okay? She mouthed. Please, Dan. She sounded really upset. What's wrong? Dan asked his sister. Can't you take a cab? No, Jenny said, her voice trailing off. Just please come, okay, Dan? And then she hung up. Who was that? Serena said. My little sister. She's at that party. She wants me to come get her. I'll come with you, Serena offered. All right, Dan said. That would be cool. We'd better tell Vanessa, Serena said, heading for the bar. Dan followed her. He'd forgotten all about Vanessa. But she looked like she was having a good time talking to the bartender. Hey, Vanessa, Serena said, touching Vanessa's arm. Dan just got a call from his sister at the party. He has to go get her. Vanessa turned around slowly. She was waiting for Clark's eyes to settle on Serena, for his eyeballs to suddenly register beautiful girl. But Clark only glanced at Serena like she was just another customer. I think I'm gonna go with Dan. She leaned over and gave Vanessa a kiss on her cheek. Tell Ruby I thought she was awesome. Then she slipped away to join Dan. See you, Vanessa, Dan called, turning to go. Vanessa turned back to Clark without a word. Who were they? Clark said, resting his elbows on the bar. He picked an olive out of a dish and held it just in front of Vanessa's lips. Vanessa bit into the olive and shrugged. Just some people I don't really know. Dan hailed a cab and opened the door for Serena. He slid into the seat beside her and looked down at his hands as the cab pulled away from the curb. They weren't shaking anymore. God, I love to dance, Serena said, letting her head fall back on the seat. I could seriously dance every single night. Dan nodded. Yeah, me too, but only with you, he meant to add. They rode the rest of the way in silence, enjoying the tired feeling in their legs and the cool air from the open window on their sweat-dampened foreheads. When the cab pulled up in front of the old Barney's building, Dan was expecting to see Jenny waiting for them outside, but the sidewalk was empty. I guess I'm gonna have to go in there and get her, Dan said. I'll come with you. I may as well see what I missed out on. I'd better look around for my sister, he told Serena when they got inside. Okay, she said. I'll meet you back here in 10 minutes. The room was full of old familiar faces, so familiar that no one there was quite sure whether Serena van der Woodsen had just arrived or if she'd been there all night. She certainly looked like she'd been having a good time. Her hair was windblown, her dress was slipping off her shoulders. There was a run in her tights, and her cheeks were all pink as if she'd been running. She looked wild, like the kind of girl who'd done everything everyone said she'd done, and probably a whole lot more. Blair noticed Serena right away, standing on the edge of the dance floor in that funny old dress they'd bought together at Alice Underground. Blair pulled away from Nate. Look who's here, she said. Nate turned around, gripping Blair's hand when he saw Serena, as if to demonstrate his devotion. Why don't you go tell her, she asked him. Tell her you can't be friends with her anymore. Nate stared at Serena with grim, slightly stoned determination. All right, Nate said, letting go of Blair's hand. Here I go. Hey, Serena said. She reached up and kissed Nate on the cheek. He blushed. You look marvelous, darling, she said in a silly hoity-toity accent. Thanks, Nate said. He tried to put his hands in his pockets, but his tuxedo didn't have any. So what have you been up to? I've been out dancing at this crazy place in Brooklyn. Nate raised his eyebrows in surprise, but then again, nothing Serena said should have surprised him anymore. So you want to dance? Serena asked. She put her arms around Nate's neck before he answered and began to swing her hips from side to side. Nate glanced at Blair, who was watching them carefully, and collected himself. Look, Serena, he said, taking a step back and removing her arms. I really can't, be friends, not like the way we were before, he began. Serena gazed into his eyes searchingly, trying to read his true thoughts. What did I do? She said. Blair is my girlfriend, Nate continued. I have to be loyal to her. He swallowed. Serena crossed her arms over her chest. If only she could hate Nate for being so cruel and so lame. If only he weren't so good-looking. And if only she didn't love him. Well, I guess we should stop talking then, she said. Blair might get mad. She let her arms fall to her sides and turned abruptly away. As she crossed the room, Serena's eyes met Blair's. She stopped in her tracks and reached into her bag, searching for the $20 bill Blair had left on the table at the Tribeca Star. She wanted to give it back, as if somehow it would prove she hadn't done anything wrong. That night or ever. Her fingers found her cigarettes instead. She pulled one out and stuck it between her lips. The music was getting louder, and around her people were dancing. Serena could feel Blair watching her, and her hands trembled as she fumbled around in her bag for a light. As usual, she didn't have one. She shook her head in annoyance and glanced up at Blair. And then, instead of glaring at each other, the two girls smiled. It was a strange smile, and neither girl knew what the other meant by it. Was Blair smiling because she had won the boy in the end and stamped all over Serena's party shoes? Was Serena smiling because she felt uncomfortable and nervous? Or was she smiling because she hadn't stooped to Blair's petty level of spreading nasty rumors and playing with Nate's mind? Or was it a sad smile because their friendship was over? Maybe they were smiling because they both knew deep down that no matter what happened next, no matter what boy they fell in or out of love with, or what clothes they wore, or what their SAT scores were, they both would be all right. After all, the world they lived in took care of its own. Serena pulled the cigarette out of her mouth, dropped it on the floor, and began walking toward Blair. When they were face to face, she stopped and fished the $20 bill out of her bag. "Here," she said, handing it to Blair. "This is yours." And then without another word, she kept on walking, heading for the ladies' room to splash some cold water on her face. Serena turned on the tap and splashed her face over and over with cool, clean water. Her gaze slipped to the floor where she saw a pair of black wingtip shoes, the fringed end of a blue scarf, and a girl's black handbag. Serena rolled her eyes and walked over. "Chuck, is that you?" she said, into the crack in the door. "Who've you got in there with you?" A girl gasped. "Shit," Serena heard Chuck say. Chuck had stood Jenny up on the toilet seat lid in the end stall and pulled her dress down so he could get at those massive jugs. Serena had come at the worst possible time. Chuck pushed open the stall door a few inches. "Fuck off," he growled. Behind him, Serena could see little Jenny Humphrey, her dress pulled down around her waist, her arms hugging herself, looking terrified. Someone pushed open the bathroom door. "Jenny, are you in here?" Dan called. Serena suddenly registered. Jenny was Dan's sister. No wonder she'd sounded weird on the phone. She was about to be mauled by Chuck. "I'm here," Jenny whimpered. "Get out of here," Serena snapped at Chuck, pulling the door open just wide enough for him to get past her. Chuck pushed by her, knocking her against the stall door. "Well, excuse me, bitch," he hissed. "Next time I'll be sure to ask your permission." "Wait a minute, asshole," Dan said, sizing Chuck up. "What were you doing to my sister?" Serena pushed the stall door closed and stood outside it, waiting for Jenny to step down from the toilet and fix herself before her brother saw her. "Fuck off," Chuck said, pushing Dan out of the way. "No, you fuck off, Scarf Boy," Dan said. He'd never been in a fight before. His hands began to shake again. "Hey, Chuck, why don't you go fuck yourself? You know no one else will," Serena hissed. "You bitch," Chuck hissed back. "You think you can come back here and act all high and mighty after everything you've done?" "What have I done, Chuck?" Serena demanded. "What is it that you think I've done?" Chuck licked his lips and laughed quietly. "What have you done?" he asked. "You got kicked out of boarding school because you're a perverted slut. You have STDs, you were addicted to all kinds of drugs and busted out of rehab, and now you're dealing your own stuff. You have a fucking baby in France." Serena was smiling again. "Wow, I've been busy." "Whatever, bitch," he said, pushing past Dan and out the door. "You know you love me," Serena yelled after him. Dan knocked in the bathroom stall. "Jenny," he said gently, "are you all right?" Jenny couldn't get control of herself. She just could not believe that of all the people in the universe, it had to be Serena van der Woodsen who found her like this. Serena must think she was so pathetic. "I'm okay," Jenny finally managed to say. She picked her purse up off the floor and pushed open the door. "Just take me home." Dan put his arm around his sister and Serena took his hand. Together they wound their way through the crowded party. Dan pushed open the doors and ran out into the street to hail a cab. When he found one, Serena got in first, then Jenny, and then Dan. Jenny put her feet up on the hump in the floor and hugged her knees, resting her head against them. Serena reached down and stroked her curly brown hair. When they reached Times Square, Dan turned to Serena, his eyes wide and trusting. "So, those stories," he said, "I mean, did any of that happen?" Serena frowned. She fished in her bag for a cigarette and then thought better of it. "Well, what do you think?" she asked. "I think it's a bunch of bullshit," he said. Serena raised her eyebrows playfully. But how do you know for sure? I just don't see you that way, he said. The corners of Serena's mouth spread wide, and she was smiling again. Good, she said. She took a deep breath and let her head fall back against the seat. Dan let his head fall back beside hers. Good, he agreed, closing his eyes. As they sped past the flashing billboards and bright lights of Times Square, Serena kept her eyes open. She had always thought Times Square was ugly and depressing compared to the quiet, manicured streets of her neighborhood. But now the brilliant lights and loud noises and the steam rising from the grates in the corners gave her hope. In the darkness of the taxi, she reached for Dan's hand at the same moment he reached for hers. She couldn't wait to see what would happen next.
Hey people. Well, I had a great time at Kiss on the Lips. I must have lost 15 pounds dancing, not that I needed to. But there are so many questions to be answered. Will Serena and Dan fall in love? Will Jenny swear off high society and fancy dresses and stick to friends her own age, even if they'll never be her bra size? Will Vanessa and that bartender get it on? Will Blair stay with Nate? Will Chuck stop harassing young girls and admit that he's a loser? Will Serena really make that movie? She's never even used a disposable Polaroid. Will people stop talking about all of the above? It's unlikely. I know I won't. It's also good. Until next time, you know you love me. Gossip Girl. This has been a Time Warner Audiobooks production of Gossip Girl, written by Cecily von Ziegesar and read by Christina Ricci, with Gossip read by Maria DeLuca. Executive producer, Maya Thomas. Produced and directed by Dennis Kao. Text abridged by Howard Prizer. Post-production by North Hollywood Sound. Gossip Girl is also available in paperback from Little Brown and Company. To listen to samples, read more about the authors, learn about digital audio, and buy digital audiobooks, please visit Time Warner Audiobooks websites at twbookmark.com and mytimewarneraudio.com. Is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental.